Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. In spite of the weather, we're glad to have you. It's really kind of interesting because we had well over 1,000 people watching last night online. And so it's really nice that you're here, but most of your friends didn't come. But we appreciate you being here. I just want to mention real quick too, most of you know that Ronny has the books and other things. There's actually some beautiful jewelry, but most stuff you'll have to pick out a design. They have different stuff if you're interested. I thought the prices were really nicely done. It's done with by a jeweler that we always go to when we're in Israel. And so part of the idea of doing a virtual tour of Jerusalem is also be able to virtually begin to pick up the souvenirs as well. So, but let's start with a word of prayer and we'll get into it tonight. Father, we thank you for this time together. I just pray that you'd bless Ronny and give him your energy, give us your focus. We thank you for those who are watching online and pray that they will be as edified as we have been. And we just ask God that as we gather in your name, that your Holy Spirit would just open our eyes and our understanding to the beautiful texture of your scriptures, that we're talking about events that took place in real time, in a real place, to real people, Lord. And we are just thankful that we can begin to understand your word in a deeper and more intimate way. And we trust you for your grace tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. So, Ronny, I just expect you to be marvelous.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, Pastor Ken, for the opportunity to be here again and to share with you Jerusalem's story, basically. And I do not know how many of you were here last night, but if this is your first evening to come, then you missed the beginning of the story, so to speak. Because yesterday we had the opportunity to go deeper to understand the city's geography, topography. We spoke about what happened in Jerusalem before the days of King David. Everybody knows what happened after David conquered the city. It's history that everybody knows. It's, of course, recorded in the Bible, etc. Question was always what happened before the days of David, so we tried to address that yesterday as well. And we spoke about the days of the first temple, all the way to the destruction of Jerusalem 586. We covered a lot. We're going to cover even more today because the plan today is to skip few centuries and to speak about maybe the most important eras in the city's history, let's say in antiquity. You know the format. We're going to go for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. There will be a lot of information coming up and down on the screens behind me. And I think that you all agree that I'm not a very disciplined speaker. And therefore, your challenge is to try to follow the screens and try to listen to what I'm sharing. And if it contradicts each other, look at me, all right, not at the screen. That will be maybe easier for you to catch up the information. So the centuries that we are skipping, and we cannot really cover everything in the city's history. That would take us a long time. That's why we call it selected chapters in the city's history. We have to say a few words about those centuries and then to go to what I guess we should call the golden era in the city's history. We speak about Jerusalem, that was a capital not just of the people who lived in Judea, but a capital of the whole Jewish world. We speak about the days of Jesus. We speak about the Roman Empire. We speak about the fourth largest city in the Roman world back at the time. We speak about a city that its fame spread all around the world, and people came to Jerusalem because they heard about the temple in Jerusalem. The city became to be such a point of attraction that even the Judeans were surprised how many people show interest in what happens in Jerusalem. So we'll dedicate the first session to speak about the days of King Herod the Great, the days of Jesus, basically, the city that he knew so well, and being excavated as we speak for a few decades now, and quite amazing stuff was found. Those of you that have not been to Israel, if you choose to come, and there will be a tour in the future, God willing, you'll be able to walk the streets of Jerusalem just like people did 2,000 years ago, because a lot of excavations are taking place, and after removing tons and tons of dirt, about 30, 40 years ago, we reached the roads of the city from the days of Jesus, climbing the stairs as Mary and Joseph did, bringing baby Jesus for his dedication in the temple. We can all do that today. So the focus of the excavations in Jerusalem is to unearth the Roman city And that's why we have so much information about that specific era in the city's history. And when Herod, the main builder, was building, he was using Roman techniques and building Roman style. And these guys were building for buildings to last forever. And to be able to watch at the Western Wall today, a retaining wall of Temple Mount, the largest man-made complex that was ever built, ever, 36 acres in size, and to know that you're looking at something that stands there for 2,000 years is quite amazing. So session number 1 for today will take us 2,000 years back in time, but I do want to say a few words about the centuries that we are skipping. Yesterday we spoke about these eras down here, some of you should remember, and it brought us to the destruction of Jerusalem, and we are skipping some very important years in the city's history, and we do need to say a few words about that. Number 1, after the first temple was destroyed and people went to exile, we did mention the prophet Ezekiel yesterday, and we spoke about his contribution by teaching the nation the history of the city, founding something that will be called the synagogue, which will be a school basically to teach the word of God. And after 50 years in exile, they come back to Jerusalem after King Cyrus makes a proclamation that the Judeans, now Jews, can come back to Jerusalem not to restore the kingdom's independence, but to rebuild the temple. In fact, the Persian treasury paid for the project. And 2 leaders are leading the people back, not Ezra and Nehemiah, as many people think by mistake. These 2 will come about 80 years later. But a man called Zerubbabel from the house of David, the Bible tells us, and the high priest called Zadok. They rebuild the city. The city was very poor looking, very small, nothing too impressive. They hesitate to build the temple. And after 20 years of hesitations, you go to the books of Zechariah and Haggai and Malachi. The prophets are encouraging the leaders build the building. They hesitate. And 515, they dedicate a new building that we will call the Second Temple. They did not know it will be called the Second Temple, or the first will be called the first one. You only call the first temple once you build the second one, right? So we speak about a new temple that was standing on top of Mount Moriah. Very simple, very poor looking, nothing too impressive. The Bible tells us that the elders of Jerusalem that still remember the glory of Solomon's temple wept bitterly when they saw what a poor-looking building this new one was. And God is promising the nation, the glory of this one, it says, will be far beyond the glory of the first one. And everybody remembered how beautiful was Solomon's temple. You understand the anticipation to see a beautiful building standing on that location. So we speak about the days of the second temple that was built by Zerubbabel, and something was missing in this temple, and that was in the Holy of Holies, there was no object. In the days of the first temple, in the Holy of Holies of the temple, you had the Ark of the Covenant. In it, you had 2 sets of tablets. The first ones that Moses broke when he came down from the mountain, and he saw the Israelites celebrating the golden calf. And the other set, there was a small jar containing manna in it, inside the Holy of Holies, and the staff of Aaron. These were the objects inside the Holy of Holies of the first temple. In the second temple, the Holy of Holies was a room that did not have any object inside. There was absolutely nothing. It was filled with God's divine presence, the Shekinah glory. There was no object inside. All right, we need to understand it because many people do think that the Ark of the Covenant was in the second temple as well. It wasn't there. And therefore, we speak about few changes and some adjustments that had to be made, even in the rituals, missing the Ark of the Covenant. By the way, the Ark of the Covenant was nice to have, but it was not a condition for anything. It doesn't mean that without the Ark, the Jewish people cannot practice the Jewish religion, they cannot worship God, they cannot offer sacrifices. The Ark was nice to have, but it does not mean that without the Ark, you cannot officiate in the temple and you cannot carry on with the Jewish way of life. I don't want to say that the Ark was overrated, but the Ark was not a condition to carry on with the Jewish way of life. Everything focused on the sacrificial system. Even the temple was not that important. The Torah, the law, doesn't command the people to build a temple. If you go to the books of Moses, it speaks about a tabernacle. It doesn't speak about a temple. All right? So again, as things developed over the years, a temple was built, and Solomon would be the builder, but we need to focus on what is important. And the only thing that was important were the sacrifices. The Jewish world is based on 3 main principles, and the sacrifices is the most important one. So as long as you can practice that, and as long as you can offer sacrifices on top of Mount Moriah, that was the only thing that we were commanded in the scriptures. God will choose a place, An altar will be built, and we can offer sacrifice. Having the temple was nice. It was not a requirement. This is important to note. All right? The focus was indeed on the sacrificial system. In years to come, after losing the second temple as well, the question would be, how do the Jewish people basically carry on? Worshipping the God of Israel, losing the most important fundamentals. We'll get to that maybe. I'll try to explain. It's not part of I plan to speak about, but maybe we'll touch on that as well. So we speak about another temple standing on top of Mount Moriah. And then we need to skip a few centuries, which are very intriguing because something happened in that time that we have no information about. Here's what we know. When you go to the book of Nehemiah and you read the book until the very end, it leaves you very confused because it looks like Nehemiah had failed his mission. He speaks about his frustration. He's being sent to the city twice, and he's a Persian official. And he tries to educate the people. He tries to force the locals that married local women to divorce the women. He tries to inhabit people in Jerusalem, and he's failing. And you can sense the frustration when he writes about what happens in Jerusalem, and the book suddenly ends and leaves the reader in an awe. Okay, now what? How do we carry on from here? We're missing a lot of information. Because the next time that we read about the Jewish people, we read about them in Greek sources. They're written about 200 years later, and the Greeks, observing the Jewish people, speak about a nation which is very zealous to worship their God, led by priests in Jerusalem around the temple. So Nehemiah did not succeed in his mission. He left a lot of chaos behind, basically. Somebody had to lead the nation to consolidate everything, to find them in that condition that the Greeks are writing about them, and we have no idea what was the procedure. We have no idea who were the leaders. So we know that Nehemiah ends his mission in Jerusalem, and that was not a success. And 200 years later, suddenly, the Jewish people are focusing around the temple. They have the Sanhedrin. They're very zealous to worship the God of Israel, led by priests. Something happened in that time that we have no evidences and no documents about that basically created the Jewish people as we will know them later on. So quite frustrating that we have this black hole, if you wish, of 2 centuries that we have absolutely no sources. Not in the Old Testament, of course, and not Persian sources. The next one, the Greeks are writing about the Jewish people. And then when we speak about Jerusalem, they say, it's quite amazing. There was a nation that there was one day of the week that no work is done, the Sabbath, quite marvelous for the Greeks and the Romans later on. They have a temple that does not contain a single statue. Well, how do you explain to these pagans that the Jews are worshiping a God that doesn't have a shape and doesn't have a form? You do understand that they were quite puzzled by what they found in Jerusalem. So we are missing some information that unfortunately we don't know the names of the leaders, we do not know the procedure. So the Bible leaves us in the Old Testament with total chaos in Judea, as we read in Nehemiah, and then we find the Jewish people well consolidated, a very strong nation, very zealous, led by priests. We have no answer how to fill up the missing information about that. So we speak about a new era in the city's life, and that will be something that's going to affect the whole world, basically, and that will be the Greeks under Alexander the Great. When the Greeks are conquering the whole area, they were not only on the mission, the Greeks were the first people that decided that they are going to spread the Greek way of life and invite everybody to join in. The mission of Alexander the Great was not just to conquer the world, it was to Hellenize the world as well. You need to understand that because this was quite mind-blowing. The idea was this: if I'm an Egyptian pharaoh and I'm conquering a nation, my God gave me victory. I am superior, they are inferior. I'm not going to invite them into my civilization because if they worship my God in a future conflict, my God may choose or switch sides to support the enemy against me. I don't want them to be part of the Egyptian civilization. We are the masters and they are slaves. For the first time that people going to conquer the world, and they go with one intent, not just conquest, but to spread the way of life and to invite everybody in, to create one homogeneous society, these are the Greeks. So we speak about the Greek world, and they were very successful. Everybody was more than happy to join in. But the Greeks brought with them something that the locals did not have. Technology, for example, to build aqueducts. That's going to change everything. If you know how to build an aqueduct and to carry water from place to place, you're no longer limited to the springs, The city starts growing, basically. They brought a concept that may look strange to many of us today of philosophy and the centrality of people and not the deities necessarily. If you could chat with a Greek individual and ask him or her a question, ma'am, sir, where do you stand in relation to your gods? The answer will be, I believe they exist. I believe that they are immortal. But besides that, we are not connected on any level. The gods lie to each other. They cheat on each other. You read the Greek mythology. They set a very poor example for us humans. You don't want to get closer to your God because the gods mean trouble. When your God is coming closer to you, you have a reason to be very concerned. When the Greek offers sacrifice, it wasn't to get closer to his God. It was to keep his God as far away as possible. The Jews, by the way, the term sacrifice means korban, that means to get closer. You want to get closer to your God, not in the Greek world. So if the gods are misbehaving, so to speak, there are no books, there are no promises, they require nothing from humans, there are no commandments, no right and wrong. The gods are promising nothing, let alone eternity. So do understand that kind of mindset. If there's no promise for eternity, the question should be, what are we living for? And the answer will be, live for today. So we should not be surprised to go and visit Greco-Roman cities and to see how beautiful they were. You focus on today. You go to the theater, you go to the bathhouse, you go to the stadium, you spend some time in the chariot race arena. There's no tomorrow. We invest in this life. So do understand that that was a different way of thinking, that everybody was happy to join in because the Greek cities were beautiful. You go to see the Greco-Roman towns later on, amazing roads, beautiful palaces and buildings and bathhouses, and everything focused on let's live for today, there is no tomorrow. One people only refused to take that invitation. The professional troublemakers of history, the Jews. Because if we are going to follow that kind of mindset, and we're going to enjoy life as the Greeks are dictating almost in a way, where do you stop? What would be the line? Not to slip back to idol worship. Can we live like Greeks without worshiping the Greek gods? You don't understand the problem here. And therefore, the Greek world is bringing with it a whole new world concept, a whole new standard of living, and the Jewish people are confused. Because if we are going to join in, we have to be very careful, only to take what we can without taking what we are not supposed to take, and that would be worshiping their gods. And how do you do that? So in the Jewish society, a breach is formed. Those people that wanted to be totally disengaged and not to mingle with the Greeks will be called later on the Pharisees. You know the name from the Bible? And it simply means to be separated. If somebody would call himself a Pharisee, usually the lower classes of the Jewish society, that means that he doesn't want to mingle, he doesn't want to be influenced. You know, people knew that this is really a threat. What's within us may not be strong enough to confront what is around us, so not to be tempted, not to be tested, we don't even want to know about the Greek world. The people who lived in the cities, like in Jerusalem, the Jewish aristocracy was very interested to be integrated into the Greek society. And since we speak about Jerusalem, it's going to influence the city. Jerusalem will be a Greco-Roman town. You won't find a single statue, obviously, because this is strictly forbidden. But besides that, we speak about the Greek way of life is so dominant in the area that Jerusalem will be basically a Greek city. Jerusalem had a gymnasium. A gymnasium was a Greek institution, basically. That's where you go to practice, to do gymnastics, and to wrestle, and to throw the discus, just like in Athens. To find that in Jerusalem, that was something new. We have some sources tell us that the priests in the temple were really irritated because many of the priests preferred not to show up to offer the sacrifices because the competition in the stadium were much more fascinating. So you do understand the problem here. How do we respond to the Greek world? Are we going to be separated? Are we going to be integrated? If you want to be part of it, you take a name upon yourself, you will be called a Sadducee. Rings a bell? So the two main groups in the Jewish society, which are mentioned in the Bible so often, Pharisees versus Sadducees, was the Jewish response to the impact of the Greeks on daily life in Judea and, of course, in Jerusalem. Most people that lived in Jerusalem were part of the Jewish aristocracy. And boy, they not only lived like Greeks, they took even Greek names upon themselves. They adopted Greek hair-cutting style. They were dressed like Greeks, but very careful, very, very careful not to worship the Greek gods. And apparently there was a way to enjoy what Greece offered without slipping back to idol worship. So we meet Jerusalem in its prime. Jerusalem is a Greco-Roman city, basically. I'm using the term Greco-Roman because when the Romans conquered Greece and brought Greek independence to an end, they also embraced everything the Greek civilization had invented into the Roman civilization. The Romans were very good in doing that. They did not really invent much. They learned from everybody, including the whole religious system. Sure, they gave the Greek gods Latin names. So Zeus was known as Jupiter, and Hera was Juno, and Aphrodite was Venus and all the others. But we speak about the Greco-Roman world because Rome embraced almost everything they had from the Greeks. And since we are in the eastern part of the world back at the time that was influenced by the Greek civilization, that was the common language in the area. So Jerusalem was a city that was part of the Roman Empire, but the spoken language was Greek. The lifestyle was Greek. We had, for example, a dynasty called the Maccabees. It was in the chart a few minutes ago. We speak about Jewish kings, basically, and Jewish rulers that rebelled against the Greek masters. And after a while, they took Greek names upon themselves. They ruled Greek style. So you do understand that challenge that you're having. To what level you want to be part of the Greek society. So that's when we catch Jerusalem speaking about the next era or the golden era. And the question is, what are the sources that we are using? Well, quite a lot. We speak about the days of the New Testament. We speak about the Gospels that speak about the daily life, among other things, in the country, but also in Jerusalem, obviously. We do have quite a lot of other sources. For example, a Jewish historian, some of you may have heard the name, Josephus Flavius, a man that gives us a lot of information about daily life in Judea back at the time, supplementing in a very good way what we know from the scriptures. So when you read Josephus, you can add another layer to your understanding of daily life in the country, and everything focused on Jerusalem. So his book is full of descriptions and full of information, even to the details, how the city used to look like. We have a very good idea about grocery shops in Jerusalem. He's mentioning names of people. You can almost feel like you live in the city and you know the people around. So this level of details, Josephus goes. We have Greek and Romans writers, obviously, and above all, we have archaeology. Jewish sages will speak about the same era, and of course, archaeology. So excavations in Israel today will focus in Jerusalem, and when you speak about excavation in Jerusalem, city of David maybe will be a very interesting site, but the focus goes always to the Roman city of Jerusalem, the city that most of it was built by King Herod the Great. The fame of Jerusalem, as I mentioned earlier, went far beyond the limits or the borders of Judea. You need to know that back in the days of Jesus, about 50% of the Jewish population did not live in Judea. They lived in big communities in Babylon, Alexandria, in Rome, and they were quite influential, and people converted to Judaism. We speak about a lot of Jews that had well-established communities all around the Roman world, but the center of everything was Jerusalem. They became to be so influential in Rome, for example, that Caesar Tiberius had to expel them from the city. Because if you're a strong Jewish community and Roman aristocrats are showing interest in worshiping the God of Israel, you're not loyal to Rome. If you don't worship Caesar like a deity, you are a danger. And Jerusalem will be the center of that as well. So Jerusalem's influence went far beyond the country or the kingdom of Judea. We do speak about the fame of the city. People came from all around the world because they heard about the temple and they heard about the beautiful palaces and they heard about Judea and, of course, the wonders of the Jewish people, etc. Suddenly, Jerusalem is enjoying worldwide attention and not just a small town that only the locals will go to the temple to worship. Everybody comes to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, of course, enjoyed that situation because money was flowing in as well. You do know, the Bible does speak about that every Jewish individual should pay his temple taxes. And these taxes are not limited to people who live in Judea. Every Jewish person around the world was supposed to pay half a shekel, that would be an annual tax, to maintain the temple. And money was coming from Rome and from Babylon, Alexandria, and with the money, people came as well. So Jerusalem enjoys a lot of prosperity, a lot of interest in the city, and that's where we meet Jerusalem when we speak about the days of Jesus and the days of King Herod the Great. One word about this man, because we're going to speak about him at least for a while. Herod the Great will be that individual that will invest in the city not only a fortune and skills, but basically his main mission was to be accepted by the Romans, not just as king of Judea, but as king of the Jews. And the way to do that is to try to create a bond between the Jewish diaspora and Jerusalem. It gives you a lot of leverage. It gives you a lot of power politically in the very heart of Rome. So Jerusalem was used as a tool, if you wish, also to gain political significance and political power in the other parts of the Roman Empire. And Herod was the man behind most of the projects that made Jerusalem what it was, including building the temple and building the streets of Jerusalem and theaters and amphitheaters. Jerusalem was indeed the Roman city, and Herod the Great was the person behind most of these projects. I'm taking a sidetrack for just a minute. Let's have a word about the king of the Hebrews. Who should be that individual? When you speak about who should be the king of the Hebrews, I'm not saying Jews on purpose. The Bible points at three different criteria. If you go to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 15, the Bible says the king of the Hebrews has to be a Hebrew, which means you cannot invite somebody, and he could be the greatest politician, the greatest leader, who is not Hebrew, and give him the position. He has to be a member of the nation. If you go to Genesis 49, when Jacob is blessing his 12 sons, by the way, he's cursing his first 3 sons. All right? Reuben and Simeon and Levi are cursed by their father, not blessed. The first one that gets a blessing is Judah. And the Bible said that the scepter will not remove from Judah until Shiloh, believed to be the Messiah, comes. So we know that the king has to be a Hebrew from the tribe of Judah. And only centuries later, when King David is asking permission to build a house to God in Jerusalem, God's answer will be, you will not establish my house, I will establish yours. And now we know the king of the Hebrews has to be a Hebrew / Israelite / now we can say Jewish, the tribe of Judah, the house of David. And that was indeed the case for a long time. But when Herod is made king, he's made king by the Romans, and the Romans couldn't care less about biblical protocol. When Rome occupied a nation, that was procedure. You try to find a local and rule through him. You do not proclaim a nation, a province, not before you are convinced that the locals are loyal to Rome and they understand how to live like Romans. In the case of Judea, the Romans needed a man that was competent, that was strong enough for the job, and they chose a Jewish aristocrat that came from a family of Idumean converts. The man wasn't even Jewish. So he was Rome's choice, and you do understand the crisis here. For the first time ever, the Jewish people don't have a legitimate king. But if you lived in Judea back at the time, you had a choice. If you knew that the king is not really representing the nation by biblical law, follow the high priest. He will be a genuine representative of your biblical beliefs and of your daily life. Well, Herod understood the problem. And Herod decided he's going to appoint high priest at his will, based on changing circumstances. But just a minute now, the Bible says who should be the high priest? The line of Aaron, position goes from father to son. Herod couldn't care less about that biblical protocol. You see, the point is that in the days of Jesus, with regard to the days of Jesus, for the first time ever, the Jewish people did not have a legitimate leadership. The king was from the wrong line, and so was the high priest. The high priest was the most hated individual in the kingdom. Collaborating with the hated Romans, a chief tax collector, the head of the temple, which means totally corruption, and a man that was a choice made by the king and not by the word of God. So we do speak about a moral crisis, a religious one, that did not affect daily life in Jerusalem. The city enjoyed more prosperity than ever before, and Jewish sages are frustrated. When they examine that, they do not understand why, when everything is corrupted, Jerusalem enjoys that much blessing. Under a non-Jewish king, under a corrupt priesthood, including a high priest, yet the city is so famous and so blessed. You understand the source of frustration. They call Herod the Edomian dog, for example, not by his name. So you do understand that there was a problem to try to explain that prosperity when the whole system basically is corrupt and wrong. So Jerusalem will be now the center, and Herod's ambition to be known around the world as a builder, most of the projects that Herod will invest in will be connected somehow to Jerusalem. I covered some of this. Let me just go over that once again. We speak about one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire, population of about 120,000 or so. The city was divided to separate quarters, and Temple Mount will be like the fifth quarter in the city. The circumference of the wall was about 4 miles, 2.5 times bigger than the old city of Jerusalem today. Those who have been to town may remember it's not that big. Jerusalem in the days of Herod, the days of Jesus, was about 2.5 times bigger by the circumference of the walls. And you have the information over there. It was indeed a beautiful town. Let me show you the map, all right, of Jerusalem, the way it used to look like. Some of you may remember that all of this is Mount Moriah. We spoke about it yesterday. City of David down here. Mount Moriah all the way up to Mount Calvary, which is here. We have the Central Valley cutting through town. And then we have the upper city. We spoke about it yesterday, mentioning King Hezekiah. The Kidron Valley on the eastern side, the Valley of Gehenna on the western side. Rings a bell? You should be familiar with this map if you were here yesterday. So that will be the sizes of the city in the days of Herod. The focus goes to Temple Mount. Let me say one word about Temple Mount. We all use that term today because it's standing there for nearly 2,000 years. We cannot call that complex Temple Mount before the days of Herod. When David purchased the threshing floor, there was no Temple Mount. When Solomon built the temple, there was no Temple Mount. Just Mount Moriah and a temple building standing on top. Temple Mount is the man-made extension that was built by King Herod the Great, bearing under it a big part of Mount Moriah. Think about a huge box that you place on top of a mountain. That will be indeed Temple Mount. So we can only use the term Temple Mount from the days of Herod and on. We use that today all the time. But only for a while, because before the days of Herod, there was no Temple Mount. You won't read Temple Mount in the scriptures. It's not mentioned by name. So Temple Mount will be the man-made project that built all of this, bearing under it quite a big part of Mount Moriah. I'll show you in just a minute. And since the city was built Roman style, you expect to find in Jerusalem Roman facilities. There was a theater, there was an amphitheater. Most of you will call a theater by mistake an amphitheater. It's not the same. A theater is a semicircular structure. People come to watch a show. There is a stage. Everybody looks at the stage. An amphitheater will be an arena, basically. Amphibian, two. Two theaters will make one amphitheater. You go to the amphitheater to watch the gladiators fight. It was a totally different, I would say, facility for different purposes to come. You go to the theater to see a show in most cases. You go to the amphitheater to see the gladiators fight. So these were two facilities that Jerusalem had. There was a horse race arena someplace around here, we don't know for sure. And the city was indeed a Roman town that functioned like a Roman town. And Josephus Flavius tells us when the priests were offering sacrifices, they could hear the crowd cheering from the chariot race arena. That's how close it was to the Temple Mount, although nothing was found in the excavations to point to the location of the theater. So this image of the city from the days of Herod, let's go into some more details. I'm going to use pictures taken from a model which is in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. A scale model of Jerusalem from the days of Herod, a little later, but this is basically the Herodian city, so to speak. The scale is 1 to 50, and they did a very good job. They could do that because of the massive excavations in Jerusalem. We are very close to understand the city when you go to see that model. You do see just one part of the city here, and that will be the upper city of Jerusalem. Every building looks like a typical Roman villa. That's where the Jewish aristocracy used to live, including all the high priesthood. The common priests did not live in Jerusalem. The high priest always lived in Jerusalem, and since you can buy the position, and it was offered to the highest bidder, there was more than high priests, more than one. that resided and was still alive. The Bible speaks about Annas and Caiaphas. Now, that's impossible. Only one can reside as a high priest, and when somebody died, his older son would replace him. Since the system was corrupt, we can say that almost half of the dwelling places here were the homes of somebody who was a high priest, is a high priest, or will be a high priest. That's where the center of power used to be in the upper city of Jerusalem. And just to show you some examples about the standard of living, we speak about the excavations in the Jewish quarter. Everything indicates a lot of good taste and a very high level of daily life in the Jewish aristocracy's life. For example, you see the nice mosaic floor over there. It's all genuine, 2,000 years old. You won't see any images, God forbid, but a lot of geometrical patterns, a lot of flowers, maybe animals and birds, but not people. You do see a very nice bathhouse right here. It was a small sauna that this family was using. The walls were plastered. To find plaster 2,000 years later, not that common in a wet place like Jerusalem, and it still survived such a long time. Everything was plastered and was painted. You do see the jars over there. It's just an idea of one Roman villa in Jerusalem, about 100 times more, gives you an idea about the standard of living in the city. That's how nice it used to be back at the time. I'm showing you now the city of David, and that will be that section over here. Now it will be a whole area, neighborhood, that was purchased by a queen that decided to convert to Judaism. Just like you have Chinatowns today in American cities, there was a Persian town in Jerusalem. Josephus tells us that Queen Helena, that came from a kingdom by the Caspian Sea, decided to purchase a part of Jerusalem. She converted and her son and the whole kingdom to Judaism. Interesting, there was more than one Jewish kingdom that wasn't really Jewish. Did you know that Yemen, for 300 years, was a Jewish kingdom? All right? There's pieces of history that nobody knows. So Judaism was much more common back at the time than it is today. Today, we are the only religion that tries to discourage people to convert to Judaism. It wasn't always the case. There are reasons why. But once upon a time, we tried to invite everybody in, and many kingdoms were really tempted, so to speak, like Queen Helena and the king of the Yemenites back at the time. So she purchased property, and there was a Persian town down in Jerusalem that will be the city of David's area, the Kidron Valley and the pool of Siloam, just to show this part of town. But the focus was on the temple. The temple was indeed the crown jewel, and let's have a few words about the temple, Herod's temple. Don't even ask me why it happens. Well, Temple Mount was indeed a massive structure, and the platform up on top, about 36 acres in size, is the largest in the world. But it wasn't just the Temple Mount. To build a Temple Mount without having decent infrastructure would not do that much sense. Think about building a huge stadium without a single parking spot. And therefore, Herod invested 10,000 stonemasons that were busy for decades to build the whole infrastructure, which would include roads and bridges and cleansing facilities and marketplaces. And if it's Herod indeed, everything will be built Roman style as well. Standing under the southern western corner of the Temple Mount, a few things are here still in situ, like the stone that you see over here. This is, of course, a replica. The original part was cut off, as you can tell. But you can clearly see that this was a corner. And this one was knocked down by the Roman soldiers from the top of the corner over there, and one of few stones with an inscription on. And this one is in Hebrew. Every kid in the country can read it because the characters are the same that we use in Hebrew today. And most likely, what it says will be the house of trumpets. Part of it is missing, and therefore there are a few speculations what will be the completion of it. But it does make a lot of sense that that was what it said, the house of trumpets. And the question is, what was that all about? Well, that corner of Temple Mount used to cover most of the city sizes back in the days of Herod. And every now and then, an announcement had to be made. How can you tell people that the Sabbath had just started, stopped working, or the holiday just ended? And therefore, the way to do that was by blowing the shofar or the trumpet, and that would be done from that corner that covered the city of David and the upper city. Keep in mind, behind that hill, just the Mount of Olives, outside city limits. So this stone was found in the excavations, which is one of the most fascinating ones. And also you can clearly see that the stone over that direction also looks like a lintel of a gate. And this one also fell from the top over there, which was the entrance to the royal stoa, or the basilica of Temple Mount from the days of King Herod the Great. The procedure was that when you come to Jerusalem to visit, you're climbing to the temple area coming from south, and you get the reason for that in just a minute. And that will be the impression as you're making your way closer to the Temple Mount. From the city of David, walking along some of the narrow streets, or you could take the broad one that was the main boulevard. The structures on both sides are new, but there used to be structures back at the time as well. And each one contained a cleansing facility. And after you clean yourself, and you're very careful not to touch any unclean object, you keep climbing. And as you exit from the narrow streets, you see in front of you the southern wall of Temple Mount. The triple gate was the main entrance, and the exit was further to the west, in what is today the double gate. People that were mourning while they were coming to visit the temple would walk the other way around. They would enter on the western side and come down these very stairs. It was a sense of community, a sense of family. You see somebody walking downstairs, you know that they are grieving some kind of a need. You know to stop next to them, offer your condolences, and then you keep climbing to fulfill the reason for your visit, and that can be a variety of reasons. You will see later on that as you approach the temple's area, the only direction that you're actually climbing to go up to the temple will be coming from south. So that became to be the main entrance for the pilgrims, because you want to climb up to the holy place and not to go down hills. And because of the city's topography, if you're approaching Temple Mount coming from the Mount of Olives, you're walking down hills. If you're coming from the upper city, down hills again. If you come from north, you're walking down hills. So the only direction that you're climbing to go up to the temple is coming from south, and that became to be the tradition. I can tell you beyond any doubt that Joseph and Mary, carrying baby Jesus coming from Bethlehem to go through those gates that were opened back at the time into the temple's area, that would be an impression how the southern wall of the Temple Mount used to look like. When you come a little closer and you look at the gigantic blocks, I'll give you some details in just a minute, you have to admire the level of precision just by looking at how well these fit one another. What a great job. Well, one will have to admire the level of precision that those stonemasons did accomplish. When you look at the stones, how well they stand one above the other. You can hardly tell where a stone ends and another one begins. You're also noticing there is no connecting material between those stones. And the question is why? Well, the answer is that in order to make mortar, in order to use that as a connecting material, you have to burn a lot of limestone. In order to burn a lot of limestone, you need a lot of timber. Israel doesn't have that amount of timber. So the compromise or the solution was to use big blocks. The biggest one and the heaviest one in the wall weighs close to 500 tons, which is the second largest and the second heaviest stone in the world. And you have to level the bedrock totally, which means that in the process of building those massive retaining walls, from Solomon Temple or Herod engineers, in the process, in building those massive retaining walls, Herod engineers had to clean everything they found all the way down to the bedrock, including what was still standing there from the days of Solomon. From Solomon's temple, not a single stone was found. And the reason was that Herod's engineers would not build on ruins. Herod's engineers will level the bedrock. In the process of getting there, they simply removed everything, including the stuff from Solomon's temple. Because if the bedrock was not totally level, this whole structure would not hold on in such conditions. So that was the reason why the Temple Mount retaining walls were built in such a way, and not smaller stones that will have a connecting material. Well, we get back to the temple in just a minute, just to show you some other parts of town. Here is the theater that was in Jerusalem, right between the neighborhood of the wealthy ones and the lower city. These were the quarters of the Pharisees. It's all on the hillside that separated the city into two, the lower town from the upper city. We're going to go back and speak about the temple in some more details. Everything was somehow connected to the temple. Still from the model, and you see the facade of the building, you're looking at the temple area from the Mount of Olives. Here's what you see. You see the massive courtyard. You see the building that has its own walls as well. So there were two sets of walls. One were the retaining walls of the man-made box supporting the platform, and the other wall was the one that separated the sacred area from the Gentiles' court. The Bible does mention the Gentiles' court. That's where Jesus turned upside down the tables of the money changers. It was a big marketplace. The temple was the biggest employer in the kingdom. It was a business, among other things, and people came to buy and sell stuff on the courtyard, and that will be the line that divided the Gentiles' court from the area limited only for Jews. Paul was arrested, as we read in Acts chapter 7. They brought accusations against him, that he brought a non-Jew into the limited Jewish area. So this wall was standing there, separating Temple Mount into two. You see the colonnades from four sides, and you're looking at the temple building, the facade or the entrance. The back wall of it will be the wall of the Holy of Holies, which means that when you enter the temple complex, you come to the women court. Men could go closer to the men court. Inside the sanctuary, the priests, and inside the Holy of Holies, once a year, Day of Atonement, the high priest. And what was inside the building? There wasn't much. There was a candelabra, the menorah, the lampstand, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense. Inside the Holy of Holies, as we said, absolutely nothing. And there were two veils or curtains that separated the Holy from the Holy of Holies. Why there were two? Because in the Day of Atonement, the high priest was moved the curtain to go inside. If you happen to be inside the sanctuary, you can see through the Holy of Holies. And that was strictly forbidden. So you go through the first one, you leave it, and then you open the other one, and then you go inside. That will be procedure. And since the high priest was in most cases quite an old man, they used to tie a rope around his wrist. Because if something happened to him while inside the Holy of Holies, like a heart attack, there was no way to go into rescue. You have to pull him out. So that would be the procedure for the high priest to visit the Holy of Holies and to actually ask atonement for the whole nation while he's inside, taking the blood of the sacrificial lamb and pour it on the walls of the temple area in the Holy of Holies. It could not be cleaned, as you understand. Maybe the smell wasn't that attractive inside, but that would be procedure. By the way, when the Roman army conquered Jerusalem for the first time at the Pompey the Great, he goes inside the Holy of Holies, looks around, and shouts with real kind of frustration, "There was nothing in here. Why fight for the place?" and leaves the building. So try to explain to a Roman, all right, what was the value of the Holy of Holies. That was his impression. When Herod built his temple, he tried to keep the dimensions or the biblical dimensions of the building, but there was a problem. When you look at the city from a distance, Mount Moriah is not the highest place in town. When you look at the city from a distance, you look at the upper city, you want to make the temple the focal point for people to see the city from a distance. The temple in Herod's days had to be built a little higher than the biblical requirements. Otherwise, it's not the highest place in town. So simply by adding more than 60 feet, all right, to the size of the building, Herod's building was a little higher than the biblical requirements. And the reason was, when you see the city from a distance, the temple is the one that you see in front of you, and by adding that, it made it higher than the upper city that was higher than Mount Moriah. That was the reason to add that in Herod's days. There was another reason, which is a tradition. When the Torah was given to the Israelites in the desert, one of the issues that the Torah deal with is the red cow. When you guys say holy cow, you say something biblical, all right? Holy cow is biblical. You go to Numbers 19, and the Bible speaks about offering a red heifer that has to be at least 2 years old without a single white or black hair on it. Why? No reason is given. You burn the beast and you use the ashes as a symbolic cleansing. How it was used, we don't really know. These are traditions. Keep in mind that the law was given in the desert in the Sinai Peninsula. It's a totally different topography, totally different landscape, and topography matters. So once you come to Jerusalem and you want to keep that law of burning the red cow, each time you're running low on ashes, you need to burn another one. Where do you place the altar for the cow in relation to the temple or the facade of the temple? When the Bible speaks about it in the desert, it was all level terrain. The Bible does mention an altar will be built opposite to the tabernacle, no temple. When you come to Jerusalem, you need to make the adjustments because topography is different. And therefore, procedure was that you're offering the heifer on an altar that was built on Mount of Olives, right opposite to the entrance to the temple. We'll get to that a little later. But there was another problem. The protocol was that when you come to celebrate Passover, you can only eat the Passover lamb, which was the family's meal basically, anywhere in town or anywhere that you can have an eye contact with the temple. Keep in mind, it's not biblical. These are traditions. So when you think about Jerusalem as a huge natural arena, and the temple is down at the bottom, you can see the temple when you're camping all around the mountains. Think about the whole area as a huge natural arena, and people come from every corner of the world, and maybe they make arrangements to rent a little parking lot or a little campground over there. And while you're celebrating, you have to have an eye contact with the temple, otherwise it won't be considered kosher. Well, the problem is that if the temple is lower than the upper city, all those people coming from west will not be able to see the temple rooftop, which means you just eliminated half of the city's topography from accommodating the multitudes. And we speak about millions. One Passover, Josephus tells us, they offered 250,000 lambs. That's a lamb for a family. We speak about millions. So by adding to the temple's elevation to make it higher, that basically cleared this whole area because now you can see from that part of town also the temple rooftop, and that's all it took. So by adding to the temple's elevation, you cleared the much larger area for more people to come and celebrate. Think about providing cleansing facilities, marketplaces, animals for the sacrifice. People did not bring the sacrifice with them. You don't want to feed it all along the way. It may be damaged in a way. You want to buy it the last minute. So to be able to provide, to supply all the quantity of animals, think about the marketplaces. Think about sanitation. You do understand that since we speak about Romans, or Herod, and his engineers were trained in Rome, every detail had to be considered. The city had the most sophisticated sewage system that even today we do not understand how was it done. Think about draining the blood of the sacrifices. How much water you need just to wash the blood from the altar after every day of practicing in the temple. So we do speak about the major project, and not just the building, but everything that came with it. Some details about how the temple used to look like. We saw it a little earlier. By the way, the stone that was found in Jerusalem is the one that comes from this barrier. It says very clearly, anybody that will go any further will be executed. This was only limited for Jews to go beyond that line over there, and we find one of these stones in Jerusalem. Well, this is the eastern gate. So when you see the city from Mount of Olives, the eastern wall, these are retaining walls of Temple Mount. You do see the eastern gate, and then you see the women court, you see the entrance to the building, the line that divides the Gentiles court from the rest, and what was called the Basilica or the Royal Stoa. That would be the indoor marketplace. The largest colonnaded building in the Roman Empire was occupying the southern part of Temple Mount back at the time. I do want to draw your attention to that structure over here, because this will be Praetorium that you know from the scriptures. That will be the headquarters for the Roman governor. That's where the trial of Jesus took place. So when Herod the builder built the Temple Mount and built the fortress over here, he named it after his master. His master was Mark Antony, and he named the fortress Antonia's Fortress. Why do we call it Praetorium? Praetorium is a general term in Latin that simply means headquarters. Every town that the Roman governor came to visit and establish his headquarters will be called Praetorium. So Praetorium in Jerusalem was indeed the Antonia Fortress. There was one in Caesarea, there was one in every major city, but the main one was, of course, in Jerusalem, and you do understand the reason. Great view over Temple Mount, a great commanding post over Temple Mount, and that will be the focal point of the celebrations, but also of potential riots and violence. You want to position yourself as close as you can to the big platform, and that's why Pontius Pilate and all the others chose the fortress here to be the headquarters, which means Praetorium. One occasion, the Bible tells us in the Gospel of Luke 23, people come to Jesus and tell him that Pontius Pilate mixed the blood of the sacrifices with the blood of the pilgrims. What are we talking about? Riots. Each time Passover was celebrated, there were riots in Jerusalem. What is the reason for the celebration? What did the Jewish people celebrate for Passover? Basically freedom. Think about a nation occupied by the Roman Empire, celebrating its political freedom on top of Temple Mount. This was the most sensitive time of the whole year. And we need to understand it because this is the background to understand the whole crucifixion and the trial. The sentiments of zeal among the Jews were so high. We celebrate our freedom while we are occupied by the Roman Empire. You do understand how such celebrations can turn easily into riots. So if you want to control what happens on Temple Mount, that's where you need to position yourself. That will be Praetorium, Antonius Fortress. The trial of Jesus took place here. From that point, the way of the cross begins as well. Some data about the temple and the temple retaining walls, which is absolutely amazing. I'll let you read it for just a minute. Just look at the sizes of the stones. I tried to use the metric system and then tried to convert it to your system. I hope that I was able to do a decent job. Just the retaining walls, large stones, more than 100,000. The second largest stone in the world, 500 tons, is in the Western Wall in Temple Mount. You do understand the amount of efforts, the amount of money that was invested, and we speak about human skills as well. We speak about a major project indeed. How was it built? How was it done? Well, let me try to impress you with my drawing skills. By the way, I don't have any drawing skills. Let me try to explain. Here is the bedrock. It goes down this way to the city of David. This is Mount Moriah. Now, when you look at the temple today, the Western Wall, you see the blocks that make the wall. What you do not see is what happens behind the retaining wall. Behind the retaining wall, bedrock is coming very steeply up to the very top of Mount Moriah, and this is all man-made. So we do have the natural rock. The platform is over here. How do you bridge the gap between the bedrock and the platform? Temple Mount basically is a huge hollow mountain. Let me try to demonstrate that in just a minute. We spoke about this big stone, 500 tons, which is also one of the stones in the retaining wall. That's how the retaining walls look like. And when we bring that to try to explain exactly how was it built, well, the whole project was built on air. And there were three reasons for that. Number one, you have to reduce the pressure from the retaining walls. Try to look at me for just a minute. If this is the bedrock and that's a platform, how do you bridge a gap between the bedrock and the platform? One way is build the retaining walls and stuff everything with dirt, tighten it to make a nice platform, and build a temple. If that's what you're going to do, you're creating a pressure that will be so much on the retaining walls not having any connecting material, they may collapse. And therefore, to ease the pressure, to reduce that, what was done basically was building lots of arches and vaults in order to create those huge hollow spaces on top of which the platform is resting. So there was no filling. There was no filling of dirt because of the pressure on the retaining walls. The other reason was storage. You need a lot of storage. Most of the offerings that were brought by people, and not just Jews, other people brought their gifts and donations, were not consumed the same day by the priests. You need to store it for a long time. How do you store meat for a month or for years? You do understand the problem. The temple had a salt chamber, and they did it by salting the meat. Salt was the most important commodity in order to keep the temple rituals working. So every offering was offered with salt. If you want to store the meat, you need to salt it. Think about water cisterns. You need to have quite a lot of water. So these huge hollow spaces were used for storage and also for water cisterns, but there was another reason, which is the most intriguing one, the issue of purity or purification. The ultimate source, I will say, that will contaminate a person, that's by the Jewish understanding, will be dead bones. If you come in touch with dead bones, if you work as an undertaker, if you happen to go to a cemetery and you touch a corpse, you have to go and cleanse yourself. Cleansing was done in a certain way. We'll speak about it in a minute. Everything was done by biblical protocol plus many traditions. So purity will be a major issue. Now here's a possibility. Once upon a time, before the temple was built, somebody was buried on the slopes of Mount Moriah. It's a possibility. If you build a temple above dead bones, you contaminate the whole mountain. You don't even know that for sure, but the mountain will be contaminated because it's resting on dead bones. Which means you need to create some kind of a gap, some air between the bedrock and where you officiate. I can show you in Jerusalem today, all neighborhoods. The buildings are built on columns because once upon a time it was an old burial ground, and people even today don't want to be contaminated because today we cannot purify ourselves. We no longer have the ashes of the red heifer. And therefore, to avoid any kind of desecration, you want to leave some air between anywhere that dead bones were buried. Jewish cemeteries outside the city always. So the whole Temple Mount, to make sure that people are not contaminated and the whole Temple Mount can function in the most pure way possible, had to be built on air, basically. So these are the reasons why it was built in such a way. So when you look at the whole complex, all you see are the retaining walls. You can't see behind, but now you know, if you could see behind those walls, you will see the natural slopes of the hill, and then you see the platform and huge system of arches, one above the other, just to leave some air between potential bones that were maybe buried once upon a time and where people were practicing the Jewish practice. So that's how the whole thing was built. And once again, it was not only fascinating, it got the attention of so many people, and so many foreigners were writing about the marvelous temple in Jerusalem. You do understand, with all that beauty, when Jesus' disciples show him the temple, bragging about it, and Jesus says in Luke 19, it will be destroyed, you do understand the shock. It wasn't meant to be destroyed. That was God's house. It will never be destroyed because he will protect his house. So that was the pride of the nation. And to be able to see that, walking down the Palm Sunday road, and Jesus says, don't trust on that over the building, it won't last for too long. You do understand that message wasn't well taken. What do you mean? This is the house of God himself. Of course it will last forever. You do know how that ended. AD 70, destruction came, and the whole temple was, of course, destroyed. Some other parts of town that I'd like to show you how they used to look like, that will be the area of Herod's palace. 3 towers were decorating it. The base of this one is still standing today. Today, when people visit the old city of Jerusalem, they come in through Jaffa Gate, someplace around here, and they see a massive structure that will be the base of this tower. Most everything is no longer standing today. But when Jerusalem was conquered by the Roman army, Titus, the Roman general, after leveling the city, decided to leave these 3 towers intact, and Josephus tells us he did that to show future generations how mighty was the Roman army that was able to overcome such a mighty city. So these were left behind as a symbol of punishment, and today what we have is just the base of one, quite a massive structure. This one was named after his wife Miriam, that he loved dearly and murdered 5 years after he married her. This was named after his brother Fatzael and his friend Hippicus. These were the 3 towers that decorated Herod's palace. As we said, some parts are still standing. We did speak about the Antonia fortress, so once again to show you, that will be at the northern side, the great commanding post over the temple's area, and that will be the place of the trial of Jesus and the way of the cross. We speak about the days of Jesus. We spoke about the days of Herod the Great, of course, the builder. Although Herod died at 4 BCE, and the ministry of Jesus started around 30 AD or so, focused in Galilee and, of course, in Jerusalem as well. The city looked very much the same, with one exception. The city was growing, so they added another wall here. That's when the city came to its climax. In the days of Herod, that was the city wall. All right, this one was added later on, almost doubling the size of the city, and that was the town that the Roman army is going to besiege, conquer, and destroy. It was indeed the 4th largest city in the Roman Empire. Once again, the city of David is over here, Temple Mount in front of you, the Central Valley. Herod's palace will be someplace around here. You get the picture pretty well by now, I'm positive. And the city had 4 quarters, and that's the way it stood. Plus Temple Mount. There was the lower city, that's where the Pharisees used to live. The upper city was the area for the Jewish aristocracy. And then there was the new town, the Bezeta, which means the north, or the northern side, and that will complete the way that Jerusalem used to look like. Just to demonstrate once again, when pilgrims came to the city, regardless which way you came from, everybody had to enter through one entrance, and that was coming from south. So if you can take a bird's view of Jerusalem in the festivals and the main holidays, You will see caravans of people coming from every corner. Everybody will get together in the city of David. Many will go to the pool of Siloam to cleanse themselves, and you start climbing from here to go to the southern wall and the southern entrance into the temple's area if you came as a pilgrim. If you came for your daily business, you can choose which gate you want to use. If you came as a pilgrim, that was a must. And in the process of approaching the temple closer and closer, you need to buy your sacrificial lamb in most cases. You need to go and cleanse yourself to bring yourself to the highest level of purity. And only then, very careful not to touch any unclean object, you climb up to the temple and you go to offer your sacrifice. That's how it looks like in the model. We saw some of it in the video as well. This whole complex over here, these were the Hulda gates, that was the name. A double gate, which was a triple gate basically, and a double gate. And as I mentioned in the video, everybody that came to practice would enter from one side and exit on the other side. If you were mourning, you would go the other way around. And the reason was, as you're climbing, you know that anybody who's coming downstairs is in need, grieving, lost somebody, to stop next to them, offer your condolences. The issue of familiarity. Think about the nation as one big family goes to worship God the Father. That was manifested basically in the southern steps or the entrance to the temple. In 1994, a very important guest came to visit Jerusalem. They just started excavating this area. Neil Armstrong, I'm sure that you know the name. And he made a statement that very few people can make. Although I walked on the moon, he said, this is much more exciting. Nice to say, right? When you're standing on the southern steps of the temple and mention the moon. So that's how it used to look like. And when you come to the city, you're climbing from south, the city of David, and as you're climbing, that's what you see in front of you. Quite a broad staircase, divided to a narrow one and a broad one. Some of these are genuine, some were added recently. But again, there's no speculation here. We're not guessing how it used to look like. That's how it used to look like. Everything happened on the southern stairs or the circuit that led into the temple. The reason why they are designated with a narrow stone, a step, and a broad one is because the animals usually are leaping. So if you brought your sacrificial lamb too heavy for you to carry in your arms and he's walking next to you, they will leap over the narrow one and will rest on the broad one. And also, it breaks the momentum. You cannot really run up full speed and go into the temple when you're breathing heavily. That will stagger, that will basically slow you down as you make your way up to the temple area. Mount of Olives, right over here, okay? I hope that you remember that, and that will be the southern wall of the Temple Mount area. Let's have a word about purification, which was a major issue in the Jewish world and still is today. If you go to Leviticus 14, the Bible speaks about the necessity of cleansing. What will defile a person? Well, many things, but the most important one will be, once again, dead bones. If you want to purify yourself, there was a certain procedure. All the Bible says, you go to a place that has flowing water. That can be a river, you can go to the ocean. Well, Jerusalem doesn't have any rivers, and Jerusalem doesn't have any flowing water. So how are you going to purify yourself? By biblical protocol. Well, that's exactly what the commentators had to step in, to develop a whole system of cleansing and purification. Interesting, in the days of the Old Testament, this principle was not really kept by people. In the excavation, we did not find a single cleansing facility, we call it a mikveh, from the days of the first temple. The only thing which is mentioned in the days of the first temple is the prophet Elisha cleansing Naaman in the river Jordan to cure him from his leprosy. So we know that was a principle. We do not know if it was ever practiced in the days of the first temple. And suddenly in the days of the second temple, it was the most important commandment. You find those cleansing facilities by the thousands everywhere. So we do not understand how come it wasn't important in the days of the first temple and so significant in the days of the second temple. Maybe because now water was not as much of a problem. If you have aqueducts, you can carry water from place to place, you solve the problem. But still the Bible says flowing water. Well, we need to find a compromise because you don't find that much flowing water in Jerusalem. So that's how the system basically works. I'll show you one in just a minute, and I will guarantee to you, when the Bible tells us that in Pentecost Day, 3,000 people were baptized, We know exactly where they were baptized because only one place in town could accommodate that many people. All the cleansing facilities by the Temple Mount area. Well, here is the idea. The idea is that you need to have a water container which is not filled manually, but filled naturally. Which means if you have a water carrier to drain the rooftop of your house, and rainwater is filled or go through the pipes to fill up the mikveh, that's kosher. You cannot go to the cistern and carry water with buckets to fill up the mikveh. That will disqualify the mikveh. That will be the compromise, and that's the system. So the city had to be designed as a catchment area because water was flowing from the rooftops and the courtyards. And by the way, most cities around the world, the streets were not paved, just streets of dirt. In Jerusalem, everything had to be paved just because of the cleansing facility system. You need to catch as much water as you can to carry it for the cisterns or to fill up those mikvahs. And when millions are coming and each one has to go through that procedure, you do understand what a struggle that was. Just to provide enough cleansing facilities, we speak about thousands, and most of them were by the Temple Mount area. Let's see if that will explain some of it. Making my way downstairs into one of the hundreds of cleansing facilities, which were called mikveh, around Temple Mount. Before you go up to the temple, you need to bring yourself up to the highest level of purity. That was done by a certain ritual, which included immersing yourself in a mikveh, which was a cleansing facility. Hundreds of those were found around the Temple Mount area, and this one is in a very good shape. Men and women alike would go down to cleanse themselves as they made their way up to the temple, not at the same place. Obviously, there was some kind of separation. You see, the staircase is divided into two. You're going down on the right-hand side before you cleanse yourself, and after you complete the procedure, you're climbing up on the other side, making sure that you leave no trace of impurity for the visit of the temple. And then, very carefully not to touch any unclean object, you're making your way up to the Temple Mount area. The Bible speaks a lot about purity, and purity is a major issue in the Jewish world even today. When you go to the book of Leviticus chapter 17, Leviticus chapter 14, the Bible speaks about the necessity to purify people that were desecrated. You find that in Leviticus chapter 14, without giving you the details. What does it mean to purify yourself? What would it take to be clean enough to go up to the Temple Mount, and what exactly you're supposed to do? The details are not given to us. And therefore, the practice of cleansing yourself and immersing yourself in water is something that is commentary added by Jewish sages over the years. In the days of the first temple, although that was a request, we do not know about such facilities. Maybe rivers and springs will fulfill that need and not build up places to cleanse yourself artificially. In the days of the second temple, that became to be a very important principle, and for that reason, cleansing people, purifying them, would not be a gesture of once for a lifetime. We speak about procedure that was done whenever a ritual manifestation was needed, and people had to bring themselves up to the highest level of purity. Visiting the temple will be the highest, and therefore cleansing was not enough. You need to also be sprinkled almost by the ashes of the red heifer, and that was done by the priest before you entered the very temple. So that would be the procedure back at the time. The idea of baptism, all right, can we stop that? Sometimes, okay. The procedure basically of cleansing is something that John the Baptist did. When John the Baptist led people down to the Jordan, he wasn't baptizing them in the Christian sense, not yet. That would be the evolution of the Jewish mikveh. He was mikveh. Maybe you call him John the mikveh maker. I'm not even sure. I don't mean to be offensive here. But the whole concept of cleansing and baptizing, the term baptism was only used later on. So John the Baptist was doing something that was very Jewish at the time, but he gave it a totally different meaning. You do not go to clean yourself for the remission of sins, as John suggested. You go to cleanse yourself because there was a certain need. You want to reverse your condition to be purified. Once you said that you're going to be cleansed for the remission of sins, that was a revolutionary way of thinking. And that was his contribution, if you wish, to the evolution of baptism, which is coming basically from the Jewish ritual of cleansing. All right, in the Jewish mindset, you do not go to the mikveh for remission of sins. That's what John Baptist, the first one that actually suggested that that's what you do when you cleanse yourself. And that, of course, was a totally different mindset and a way of understanding. I did promise to kind of release you 7:15. Give me 3 more minutes, and I will keep my promise. We are looking at the Temple Mount now from the northern side. If I may, the Bible tells us, John chapter 5, now there was a pool by the sheep gate. That will be the pool of Bethesda. We speak about a healing place. You know John chapter 5 because you know your Bible. The sheep gate will be right here. Through that gate, the daily offering was carried into the temple twice a day. It was only used for that purpose. And once again, you see the Antonia Fortress and the city wall back at the time. Let me answer a question that everybody's asking today. And do we know where the temple was located exactly? The answer is yes and no, in most cases. Let me suggest the following. When you go up to the top of Temple Mount, and we're going to visit Temple Mount, speaking about Islam a little later on today, there was a big building over there called today the Dome of the Rock, and many people suggest that's where the temple was standing. It's a possibility. Here's what we do know. We do know that when the high priest assistant was offering the red heifer, that's what the books are telling us, not the Bible, the books of our sages. He could see from the temple above the eastern gate into the temple's gate. The problem is we do not know where the altar was. We do know the eastern gate beyond any doubt. So if you suggest that the Dome of the Rock is where the temple was, and you mark a line from the dome above the eastern gate, if you know for sure, it doesn't fall on Mount of Olives. I'll say it once again. Temple, eastern gate, altar for the red heifer, supposed to be on one line. The problem is, in order to establish a line, you need to have 2 spots beyond any doubt. We only have one, and that will be the eastern gate, which is here. So if you mark a line from the Dome of the Rock today, suggesting that's where the temple was, and you take the line above the eastern gate, it doesn't fall on Mount of Olives, it falls someplace on the northern side of Mount Scopus. So at least based on this theory, where the Dome of the Rock stands today cannot be the place of the temple. Temple Mount is a large platform. Where else on top of Temple Mount could a temple stand? Well, there was another possibility, and this one will take us to a location about 100 yards north of the Dome of the Rock, another place on top of Temple Mount that the bedrock is not covered by the man-made platform. There has to be a reason why they left it uncovered. And this one is totally leveled. The Bible tells us David purchased a threshing floor, and that's how the temple was built. A threshing floor supposed to be leveled. This rock is leveled. The one inside the Dome of the Rock is very rugged. And this location is going right above the eastern gate and falls right on the Mount of Olives. So maybe that's where the temple was standing and not where the Dome of the Rock stands today. It's a suggestion, but it makes a lot of sense. And this is to try to answer the question where on top of Temple Mount the temple was standing. It's either one or the other. It was still Temple Mount. One location or the other. Where exactly? Well, you do have the 2 choices now, the 2 options now, and you choose the one that you like. It's either one or the other. This city was conquered by the Romans, destroyed down to ashes. Jews were not permitted to visit or to see the city from a distance for centuries to come. And the next session, we are going to skip some time in the city's history, and we'll speak about the biggest revolution in world history that was done peacefully, not violently, and that's changing the religion of the Roman Empire from pagan to Christian. And we'll see how it affected Jerusalem as well. So the next session, if you should come back in about 50 minutes, will take us to the Christian town of Jerusalem and then the Muslim town as well. Thank you for your attention. Please be back in 15 minutes, which means 7:35. We start on time. Thank you. Okay, folks, please come and take your seats. This one tells me I'm a minute late. We run a tight ship. This part of the tour guiding which is in me. All we need to do is time management. That's it. Be there on time. That's it. The rest is not important. Well, folks, I do want to add something to the previous topic and to try to answer the $64,000 question about where is Mount Calvary and where was the place where Jesus was crucified, where is the tomb and the resurrection. And we have some confusion regarding that. Let me try to demonstrate that to you by looking at the model. When I say confusion, it's because of one main reason. The Bible doesn't give us any directions. If the Bible had told us that Jesus started walking with the cross and he went west or east or south or north, it will give us at least an idea where to look for Mount Calvary. Since we do not have such information, we need to rely on what we know about Jewish traditions, about the Roman mindset behind crucifixion, and we need to come to some conclusions. For example, we know beyond any doubt that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, that's the tomb that we're talking about, was not inside the city walls. That's impossible. Jewish graveyards are always outside the city limits, number one. Number two, if you know the Roman mindset behind crucifixion, you want to make the punishment as public as possible. And which is the most public place outside the city walls? The main gate, the main road, if possible, a small hill. Knowing the walls of Jerusalem back at the time from the book of Josephus plus excavations, and knowing where the main gates used to be, we have to point at two different possible locations. One is called today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that buries under it a place that's believed by many to be Mount Calvary. If you're a Catholic, a Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Egyptian Coptic, or some others, you believe that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is indeed Mount Calvary. The problem is, it's not on Mount Moriah. If we believe that the cross was standing on Mount Moriah, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is not on Mount Moriah. I'll try to demonstrate it in just a minute, but since it's not 3D as always, it's hard to notice. Let's see if you can make some sense out of it. That's the model in Jerusalem. Let me try to point at the two possible locations for Mount Calvary and even suggest that maybe the two are connected somehow. Bible says that by the cross, there was a tomb. Please define by. What would qualify to be by, adjacent to? Come on, work with me. 100 yards, 200 yards, 300, am I pushing it? 300 yards? What about 600 yards? Because if you tell me that 600 yards is qualified to be next to, adjacent to, maybe we don't have to choose. Maybe the cross was standing indeed on top of Mount Moriah, but the tomb was where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is at. If that's a possibility, maybe the two are connected. These are speculations. It's not hard science. We speak about faith, matters of the heart, you take it or leave it. But you come to Jerusalem, you can be confused, because two places are known to be Mount Calvary for the crucifixion and the tomb and the resurrection. Let's see if the following makes sense. When you read the Gospels and you try to come to some definite conclusion about the location of Mount Calvary and Golgotha, well, that will not be easy because the Bible doesn't give us any directions. Which way was Jesus walking with the cross? And therefore, we need to rely on some information from the Jewish world, from the Roman traditions. For example, we have to agree that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea had to be outside the walls of the city. Keep in mind, the wall that you see in front of you was not built yet in the days of Jesus, which means the city wall of reference is the one further inside. The second thing that we need to know is the Roman idea behind crucifixion. If you want to crucify anybody, you want to make it as public as possible. You want people to see the punishment. And what will be the most public location outside the city walls? The main gate, the main road. So knowing that will lead us to point to two possible locations. Number one, the place where today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built. That will be by the main road that departed the walls of Jerusalem all the way down to Jaffa. And right outside the building, the wall, there is a little hill, which means you have an elevated area, which is by the main road, by the main gate, a possible location. But then there is another one, Because if we believe that the crucifixion took place on Mount Moriah, the hill that I'm pointing at for the church over there today is not Mount Moriah. The city is made of two hills and a deep valley cutting through. Mount Moriah is the one on the left-hand side. And therefore, lo and behold, there is another possible location. It's by the Damascus Gates area, a major road, little higher than the rest of the area, and outside the city walls. That's a place which is known for the last century and a half by the name the Garden Tomb. It is Mount Moriah. And therefore, it's either one or the other. We are speculating because we don't have the relocation. Let me make a suggestion. Take it or leave it. Is it possible? Because the Bible says that by the crucifixion place, there was a garden with a tomb. Please define by. We do not know. Is it possible that the crucifixion took place on the area of the garden tomb, but the tomb itself was where the church is, and that was the place for the resurrection? At least we need to consider that possibility. And if this is the case, you don't have to choose one from the other. But once again, since the Bible doesn't provide those details, we are speculating. So it's either one or the other, or maybe somehow the two are connected. Okay, so that's our dilemma. And once again, to point it out, here is one hill. That's the land of Moriah. The Garden Tomb is located on the very top of Mount Moriah. The central valley is cutting through the city. And then the other location where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands is not Mount Moriah. That's across the valley in what we call the upper city. It's either this one or that one. As I said, take it or leave it. These are the two possible locations. I read one article years ago that even suggesting that Mount of Olives is indeed Mount Golgotha, based on what? Not much. But that's how people make money. You have a great idea, you don't have to prove it in any way. You point at something, somebody will buy the book, all right? There's no reason to believe that Mount of Olives is indeed the place for the crucifixion. That's as clear as I can make it. I'm sorry. I hope that I was able to convince you that there are two possible locations, or maybe the two are connected. All that belongs to the previous session that we had. Let's make some progress and speak about the two eras in the city's history, which will be the second session for today. And we speak about selected chapters in the history of Jerusalem. We'll speak about Christian Jerusalem, the Byzantine era. Let me try to clarify the name, because many people are confused about what was Byzantium and why do we call it the Byzantine era. Byzantium was a small community that was located on the shores of the Black Sea. That's modern-day Istanbul, and it was built by Constantine the Great as a capital of the Christian world. When he started his revolution, you cannot base yourself in Rome. Rome was a pagan city. You need to have some neutral ground, so to speak. You need to introduce a new religion, a new way of life, a new belief to so many people. You cannot start that revolution from the city of Rome that was still very much pagan. You need to have a fresh start. You need to connect the place with the Christian world. And Constantine chose a small village and decided to establish his capital as a Christian town and named it Constantinople. Constantinople was officially dedicated in the 30th of May, 330, which is also marking the beginning of the Christian era in the world history, and of course in the history of Jerusalem as well. So since the name of this town was called Byzantium, the name simply evolved and will describe the whole empire, or the Byzantine Empire, that was the Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire. What is confusing is that you still speak about Rome under a new religion, but that was the only change. So the Roman Empire was known for many things. It was pagan, it was Christian, still the same language, the same way of life with a new religion. The eastern part of the Roman Empire, the Greek-speaking part, will be the Byzantine Empire. Western Europe did not have a Byzantine period in their history. The Latin-speaking part will evolve later on to be the Catholic world, and the Greek-speaking part will be the Greek Orthodox world. After the Great Schism of the Church, 1054, that was the fault line. It was based on language, on culture. Israel/Palestine is in the Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire, and therefore Jerusalem has in its own history the Byzantine era, right? So that's just to clarify the name. what was Byzantium and what's the connection to the Byzantine Empire. When you look at the colorful chart in front of you, we are climbing now from the Roman days. We spoke about the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman army. Jerusalem was now the base for the Roman legion that was stationed in the city. The city ceased to exist after Rome conquered the city. The reason for the war was the Jews were fighting for the temple, fighting for the freedom in a way. It ended up with a terrible disaster. What we call the Jewish-Roman Wars of the Great Revolt ended up with Jerusalem in sackcloth and ashes. The Romans celebrated their victory. Jerusalem became to be the place of a Roman army base. There was no city. But another change will take place right after that, before we speak about the Byzantines, and that will be the days of an emperor by the name of Adrian. Adrian decided that Rome is big enough. He had no ambition to conquer more territory. The empire covered a huge area, very hard to control. He decided to make peace with the most bitter enemy of the Roman Empire, which were the Persians, and to start consolidating Rome under one culture, one civilization, the Greek one. And that will include the Jews as well. Because when it comes to Temple Mount, the temple was destroyed. But without a building, it doesn't mean that the mountain is not holy. And when Adrian decided to turn Jerusalem into a Roman colony and named it after himself, Aelia Capitolina was the name, he decided also to build a temple on top of Temple Mount, this time for Jupiter, the main god of the Roman pantheon. You do understand, for the Jewish mindset, it's totally different. To have Temple Mount in ruins was something you can easily tolerate, but to have a pagan temple on top of Temple Mount, that would be a reason for another revolt that the Jews went against Rome. It was called the Bar Kokhba revolt that ended in a total disaster. Jerusalem is no longer a Jewish town. Jews are not permitted even to see the city from a distance. So people could come to Mount of Olives, but you have to do that in disguise. The Romans will not allow Jews for centuries to see Jerusalem even from a distance. And Rome was so upset with the Jewish rebellious spirit, going to war time after time after time, over reasons that Rome could not understand. Why are you so serious about your God? Why are you fighting for his house? I won't fight for a temple of Zeus. I don't care about him that much. That was something that Rome could not understand. Why a nation will risk everything to go to fight for a God that they worship? That was not the Roman mindset. And they were simply furious. You are rebelling time after time after time. We need to totally destroy that spirit. And since Jerusalem is the focal point, you can no longer visit the city. That will diffuse some of the zeal that you all sense. That was the mindset of the Roman Empire. And to make it even worse, we're going to break even the linkage between the name Jews and Judea. We're going to name the new province Palestine. That's how the name Palestine came to the world, named after the Philistines, not Palestinians, all right? The Philistines that came from the same culture as the Greeks that Rome could sympathize with. So Adrian, just to create a new atmosphere among the Jews, you're no longer connected to this land. Even the name of the land is going to change. It's no longer Judea. We call it now Palestine. So Jerusalem basically ended up as a town in ruins, and then a city that was built Roman style by Adrian, and that was the condition of the city. It was called Aelia Capitolina for a while. The name Jerusalem was not in use, and the name Palestine sticks so well that even today, people who are not pro the state of Israel will still call the land Palestine. Today, it's a political term, basically, although it was not meant to be a political term. It was a term that was made to humiliate the Jews and to break that linkage between Jews and Judea. Tomorrow morning, we're going to speak about what happens today in Israel, and we'll speak about the Palestinians and their terrorist, I would say, mindset, and we'll make that connection, obviously. But many people do not know the meaning of Palestine and what were the reasons to name the land Palestine. Well, now you understand why the place is called Palestine for the last nearly 2,000 years, as an attempt made by the Romans to try to break that connection, the linkage between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, and of course Jerusalem as well. Which brings us now to the Byzantine era, and that big decision that was made by Constantine the Great is going to change the world basically. And when the decision was made, it did not affect the city that much because it took a long time to educate the masses on a new religion, on a new way of life. Think about that challenge. A decision was made for the emperor that he's going to introduce to the Romans about 50 million people. That's the estimate number of the Roman Empire. I'm going to teach you something that you never heard about. I'm going to convince you that what I'm teaching you is the right thing, because I'm going to teach you how to worship the only true God, which means everything you did so far was absolutely nonsense. You believed in something in your ancestors that was all wrong. I'm going to teach you about the Bible, about the Word of God, about the God that we're going to worship. That's a challenge, not easy to do. If you're approaching people and you tell them basically everything you knew so far, you're wrong. I'm going to tell you what is the right thing to do. You do understand. You'll have some opposition, some resentment. The pagan world would not disappear overnight. But when you lead such a revolution, and this is the best word, revolution, it had to be not violent but peaceful. You want to reach out to people. You want to educate the masses. You need to approach 50 million people that are illiterate, most of them. Where do you begin without the modern media? How do you do that? Let me give you some examples, and please work with me for a minute. Every town had a patron god, a god that was protecting the city. In the case of Jerusalem, I just said Jupiter. That will be the main god of the Roman city of Jerusalem. The problem is we no longer believe in gods. There's only one God that we worship. And he doesn't really have a shape or a form, etc. So if you chose a Roman god to be your protector, that was the town's choice. The city council will get together, they decide, we want that deity to be our patron, we're going to build a temple for him. Well, you still want to be protected by something, but it cannot be a god. May I offer a saint instead of a god? His name is Saint Peter. You never heard the name, I know, but he was a great individual. I'll tell you all about him. Is that okay with you? That we are going to worship now, or we're going to pray, we're going not to a god, but to a saint? Some will say yes, as long as somebody protects us, and some will say no. By the way, we're going to build a building for that saint. We'll call it a church. You never heard the term before, I understand. It's not a temple anymore, and we'll make it much nicer than the temple of Jupiter. Is that okay with you? Some will say, sure, as long as we are protected, and the buildings are going to be much nicer, sure, why not? Who goes into a temple in the pagan world? Who was invited in? Nobody, just the priests. Who goes into a church? Everybody. You see, because our God is compassionate, our God wants to reach out to everybody. You're invited into his home. You need to feed the people with information. You need to convince them. Cities are going to change totally, and temples will be out replaced by churches. We speak about a mindset that has to be changed. It takes time. You go to the theater. It's part of your daily routine as a Roman, a pagan that lives in the Roman Empire. And you bought tickets for the show today. You wanted to see Hercules and the Amazons. Well, there was a switch. There was a little changing plans. The show for today is Adam and Eve. Are you okay with that? It's a great story. It starts in a garden far away. There was a serpent involved and an apple. They start naked, but then we have to dress them up. Popcorn is on the house today. Is that okay with you? You don't understand how it had to be done. You need to educate the masses. You do it gradually. The city begins to change as well. You go to the bathhouse. It's part of your routine almost every day. Go to the bathhouse. Before you go home, I'm going to introduce a new principle. We call it baptism. There is some water in the bathhouse. It will take only a few minutes, but it's part of the thing that you have to do as part of your indoctrination, education, before you go back home. What is the biggest celebration of the year that all of you celebrate? Let me give you a clue. December 25th. What is the reason for the celebration? Please don't say Christmas, not yet. What are you celebrating? Basically, the rebirth of the sun god. In the northern hemisphere, the days are getting shorter to December 21st. You all know that. And then, lo and behold, the days are getting longer. The sun god is back to life. Let's celebrate a birthday. We'll celebrate a birthday, but not of the sun god who doesn't exist, but of our Messiah. Is that okay with you? You don't understand how it had to be done. It wasn't just on that level of educating. Cities had to change as well. The manifestations of the pagan world had to be erased. the theaters, the bathhouses, everything that you can connect with let's live for today because there's no tomorrow doesn't have a place in a Christian town. Now it affected Jerusalem more than any other place because until then, who cared about Jerusalem as a holy place? Only one people, the Jews. And suddenly when you accept Christianity to be the empire's religion, you do understand that Jerusalem is going to enjoy a lot of prosperity as a result of that. Jerusalem is going to be now holy to two people, basically. We speak about competition, no doubt. But we also speak about a totally new chapter and a new era in the city's history. So once you make that resolution and that decision that the city is going to be a Christian town now, number one, you destroy the temple on top of Temple Mount. The one that the Romans built for Jupiter under Adrian is now torn down, and Temple Mount will be now a huge platform that will be the dump of Jerusalem for nearly 300 years. It's also part of the education. Hear me out. Jesus spoke about the destruction of the temple. To make sure it's not being rebuilt, we have to cover that with as much rubbish as possible. As long as we do, Christianity is victorious. People were told that you need to bring your dirt and your garbage and dump it on top of Temple Mount. Temple Mount will be the dump of Jerusalem for 3 centuries. Mountains of rubbish on top of Temple Mount. It was part of educating the masses. And we need to understand this whole procedure, and the pagan world was not destroyed or did not disappear overnight. So we're in the process of educating people, and the main thing was basically is not just that Constantinople is the new Christian capital. Jerusalem will be now the new center to educate the people as well. So Jerusalem enjoys a totally different status, something that the city did not know before. It's a change of religions, and you do understand the challenges. So you're going to tear down everything which is pagan and start building churches in the city. But there was a kind of a twist in the story, which I would like, if I can, to try to focus on. The idea that there are holy places or the land is holy is something that was invented, forgive me for the term, by Constantine as a means of education. The Bible does not believe in holy places. You will not find the term holy place in the scriptures, not even once. There's only one place the Bible calls holy, just one. 20,000 points for correct answer. The points are good for nothing, by the way. Mount Moriah. The Bible doesn't call any place on the planet holy. The one place is the one that God chose. That will be indeed a holy location. The term Holy Land is not biblical. Because land is not holy, God is. So the concept that we are going to sanctify places as a means of education, that was one of the contributions, if you wish, that we have from the days of Constantine and on. To make the connection of places and scriptures, somebody had to make that connection. You see, the Roman gods were worshipped in different places. It wasn't connected to books. It wasn't connected to scriptures because they did not have any scriptures with any authority. Now, when you want to educate the masses, especially those who lived far away from Israel, you need to bring it down to the level, simple people, mostly illiterate. If you're willing to spend the money of your lifetime savings and go to Jerusalem, you can see the places with your very eyes. You can touch them. You can feel them. That will fortify your faith, that what we taught you in church about the places do exist. So people started coming to visit those places, but the whole idea that we are calling places holy, that will evolve to be the Holy Land or the Terra Santa, it was a necessity. It was a way to educate the masses. I'll say it once again. The Bible, especially the Old Testament, doesn't like the idea of holy places. For example, when Moses died, he was buried by God himself, and nobody knows the place of his burial. The fear was, if you go to places, you start worshiping the places, and you become a stone worshiper, and you forget the God behind the places. Don't go to places. The Bible doesn't provide much geographical material because of that reason. Today, it's confusing. You want to try to identify places, you try to find this data. The Bible doesn't give you much geography, because that was the fear. If people know the location, they'll go to the location and they'll start worshiping the stone and the tree and the river and the spring. So as a principle, holy places are not really biblical. You won't find the term Holy Land anywhere in the scriptures. You find holy ground twice, which is a limited spot. When Moses stands by the burning bush, the Bible says that was holy ground. When Joshua encounters the angel outside the walls of Jericho, the Bible says that was holy ground. Holy soil is mentioned once in Zechariah 12:2. But that's it. So to create an area that will be called the Holy Land, the Terra Santa, Constantine, and I guess his Christian advisors, all right, started that procedure. And if the land is holy, which will be the holiest place in the land? Obviously, Jerusalem. So that was the beginning of it. And the city did enjoy a lot of prosperity, and money was coming, and the whole imperial treasury was behind that process of turning Jerusalem into a Christian town, and the city had to change in many ways, and that's where we're going to find it when we speak about the Byzantines. I'm kind of going ahead of myself, so we just covered most of the story over there, and you see that in front of you. The way it was done was that people came to Jerusalem from the Roman administration, and they tried to identify places in the country, and then they started building buildings on these places, because once you identify a certain location, in most cases a little hill or a cave, you have to protect it, because people are going to come, and each one wants to take just a little piece of stone back home. Think about the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane. Everybody wants to take just a branch of the olive trees. You don't understand. Nothing will be left after a while. So you start identifying those places, and you need to protect them. And you build a building. In a way, a church was born. A church not as a body of believers, but as a place which is connected to a certain location in a way to educate the masses of the Roman Empire. So that was a gradual procedure, and Jerusalem was maybe blessed by that, but there was much confusion as well. So Constantine the Great was the man that started this whole procedure, and developing gradually the whole concept of the Holy Land and the concept of the Terra Santa and the holy places, etc., because today Israel is covered by holy places. All right? How many of them are genuine? How many are traditions? Do we know the exact place where Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount? All the Bible tells us he took his disciples and climbed a hill in Matthew chapter 5. Which hill was it? There are many hills in the area. Nobody tried to identify those before it became to be a necessity. Because you want to educate people in France about this location, show them the place. Otherwise, it's kind of an abstract. People need to see, people need to feel, people need to understand. In a very short time, the whole country was covered by hundreds of holy places, basically. And the man behind, or basically his mother, was Helena, Constantine's mother, and she was sent over to Jerusalem, and she was on a mission. 82 years old, not a young woman, back at the time. 327 was the year, and she was backed by the imperial treasury, and her mission was to try to find as many of these locations as possible in Jerusalem. And then the question was, okay, we found a place, now what? As I said earlier, the idea that we're going to build a church above the ancient holy place, and that would be a place of worship, wasn't even born yet. That would be the outcome of identifying those holy places. There was a fascinating story about Helena. She was asking in Jerusalem, one of the local guides, the Roman sources tell us it was a Jewish guide. They said that the Jewish guides can be trusted more than all the others. So my profession is very important and very ancient, as you understand. And a Jewish guide showed Helena the place of the true cross. She was curious. Where is Mount Calvary, right? You all want to know Mount Calvary. And he took her to that location. And basically there was a small temple standing there, marking the site that was torn down a few years earlier. And she found underground in a small cave over there 2 pieces of wood. And she came to the conclusion that these are pieces of the true cross. And that's what she was told by the locals. But she was really kind of hesitant. She was asking to bring her another piece of wood. And she was asking to bring to her from the local hospital people that were in mortal condition. And they came closer to her, and those who touched the piece of wood that was indeed part of the true cross recovered miraculously, and all the others did not. So based on that, and I'm being a little cynical as you understand, right? But based on that, she came to the conclusion that must be the place. That was the reason why the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built, based on Helena's idea that that has to be the place after she saw a part of the true cross. And people that touched it were recovered immediately. That was the reason, all right, as we know from the stories at least, to decide that this is indeed Mount Calvary, and that's where the cross was standing. And since she came backed by the imperial treasury and money was not an issue, they started building what will become the central church for the Christian world until this very day. It's not St. Peter's in Rome, you need to understand that. St. Peter's Church is more politics than a place of great significance when you come to this narrow perspective of which is the authentic location for the crucifixion. It's not in Rome, it's in Jerusalem. So the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, dedicated in the 14th of September 335, will be from that point on one of the focal points of Christianity. When I say Christianity in that perspective, there's no Greek Orthodox and no evangelical and no Protestants. We speak about Christianity as a general religion, being in the process of teaching the multitudes. There was no such distinction, at least not yet. There was one to the monophysites, and it doesn't matter, I'm not going into church history, but Jerusalem is now celebrated to be the center. The place of the cross was found, a church is built to be followed by many others as well. For example, she was the one that also built the church on top of Mount of Olives when she thought that that's where Jesus taught his disciples how to pray the Lord's Prayer. It's still there. It's a new building, but it's resting above the most ancient one from the 4th century. So we should give credit to Helena and Constantine for identifying those places. Some are sheer tradition, there's no way to prove anything here, and some, even historically, are better places, better choices. Here is part of the confusion. The ascension of Jesus took place from Mount of Olives. Where exactly? It's quite a big mountain. We don't know the exact location. It didn't stop people from finding a place claiming we have the authentic rock. We have 5 different sites on Mount of Olives, all authentic, that commemorate the ascension and the second coming. By the way, the Bible doesn't say the top of the mountain. You go to the last chapter in Luke's Gospel, the Bible says outside Bethany. Bethany is on the eastern slope of Mount of Olives and not on the very top. We always look at the top of the hill. The Bible doesn't say the top of the mountain. It says outside Bethany. Interesting, you go to Acts chapter 1. The Bible said the disciples, after witnessing the ascension, went back to town. For some reason, the Bible tells us they were standing within the Sabbath day's journey. I'm not going there, but it's not the mountaintop. They were standing where the Garden of Gethsemane is at today. Is it possible? Is it possible that the ascension took place at the Garden of Gethsemane? I'm just telling you what the Bible says. I'm not making up any of it. It's either on the eastern slope outside Bethany, or maybe someplace in the area of the Garden of Gethsemane. You can always say, you can see from the garden the mountaintop. It's possible. But the Bible doesn't say necessarily the ascension and the second coming will take place on the mountaintop. These are traditions, okay? And where exactly on the mountaintop? One of my tours there, a lady was very concerned, said, how is he going to come back? There's so many buildings around. Well, so, man, I'm sure that he knows where to land and touch down when he's coming back. But yeah, so again, confusion definitely when it comes to geography because we are lacking that data and that information. So Constantine's mother Helena was the lady behind most of these holy places in Jerusalem. She started the whole procedure. So it started by identifying a place, and then you build the building to protect the place. And people that start coming to visit, all they see is a building, not the very site. Now that's frustrating. We paid all that money to come to Jerusalem, and you tell us inside the building, we want to see the site, that's why we came. So they added another floor, and they made the hole in the second floor so people could see from above. You go today to the Church of Annunciation in Nazareth. You go today to the church in Capernaum. These are all replicas of how the old churches used to be built. They built them as 8-sided buildings because of the 8 blessings on the Sermon on the Mount and 8 days that passed between Palm Sunday to Resurrection Sunday, that became to be the standard. 8-sided buildings, which are built over places which are connected to the ministry of Jesus. That's how it all started. So credit should go to Constantine and his mother Helena. She was the one that identified all these places in Jerusalem. And then pilgrims started coming because now there were places to visit. Until then, the city was pagan basically. Temple Mount was in ruins. Why come to visit? Now there was a reason. Because there are places to visit. A new thing is going to develop, Christian pilgrimages. Until then, Jews came as pilgrims 3 times a year to Jerusalem. Remember the day of Pentecost? There were so many people in town that spoke different languages. We speak about Jewish pilgrims that come from every corner of the world. They don't come anymore because there's no temple. In a way, the Jewish pilgrims were replaced now by Christian pilgrims. So that tradition was simply carried on. We come now to Jerusalem, we are going to visit those places, not to offer sacrifice on Mount Moriah, that was the Jewish reason, but to go and follow the footsteps of Jesus and get to know the city, get to know the places. And we do have quite a lot of evidences, quite intriguing, that are given to us by Roman families, people that were aristocrats, that were literate, and they left behind a whole journal of the visit to Jerusalem from the early 4th century. It's very interesting to read the books. You can actually see how the city begins to change. We speak about a nun that came from Egeria, from Spain, and she left the whole journal behind, how Jerusalem looks like. She speaks about they're building now the church where Jesus was crucified, the same location. She sees the whole procedure. We speak about a man coming from Bordeaux in France, the traveler from Bordeaux, 333, and he speaks about what he sees around him. He speaks about the temple which is in ruins. He says that the Roman authorities, not Christians, allowed the Jews to go to Temple Mount once a year to mourn over the temple, and the Jews go to a rock that has a hole in it. Interesting to note, the rock inside the dome of the rock today has a hole in it. So was it indeed the temple? How could they tell? Jews were not permitted to come to the city from 70 AD. Where was the guarantee they knew where to go? You understand my point? So at that specific year, the traveler from Bordeaux tells us about how the city looks like and the fact that the Roman authorities do give permission to the Jews to come once a year and to mourn for the temple, and they go to a stone that has a hole in it. So just a list of all those pilgrims that came to Jerusalem and left their stories behind. That's the best document that we have to describe Jerusalem from the 4th century and 5th century. Then we'll have another one that will be also quite fascinating to you, so I hope. So Jerusalem is experiencing now a lot of prosperity. Meanwhile, something else happens. The Roman Empire is being invaded by the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, and the Huns are going to come. The western part of Rome is going to suffer invasions of these hordes of nomads and barbarians to such an extent that Rome itself was not a safe place to live in anymore. So the Roman aristocrats, not Christians, are leaving Rome and they go to the other Christian place, Jerusalem, bringing money with them, bringing influence with them, and suddenly the city comes to its best condition ever, like in the days of Herod. Churches are being built, lots of money flows in. There's a whole layer of educated people, all Christians, that come to the city. That will add to the attraction. Because now you go to Jerusalem not just to visit, also to study. A big library, a lot of schools. It was a center now of Christian education as well. Because until the days of Constantine, Jerusalem was not visited by Jews or by Christians. Christians were persecuted all around the empire. It will be Caesarea that will be the Christian center, not Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem is the attraction for a lot of scholars, a lot of information, books and schools. It is becoming indeed to be a Christian center. I do want to say another words about this traveler from Bordeaux because he's very important to the story. He visited Jerusalem 333, right after Constantine made his first proclamation of Christianity is a permitted religion. You see, Christianity was accepted gradually. 313, Constantine makes a proclamation that Christianity is a legal religion. Until then, Christians were persecuted all around the Roman Empire. Only later on, At 380, an emperor by the name of Theodosius said that Christianity is a preferred religion, and 393 Christianity is the only legal religion. So it took about a century to complete that revolution officially by publishing the rules and regulations. Christianity is a permitted religion and now the only religion. And of course, Jerusalem was the center of everything. So the traveler from Bordeaux is witnessing how the city used to look like. He's visiting Temple Mount, we mentioned it earlier. He's visiting Praetorium, and he said that this is where the this is where the trial of Jesus took place. And he visited basically the ruins of what we call the Antonia Fortress. He mentions the Pool of Bethesda, the Pool of Sheep, as it was called in Hebrew as well. So all those places, he speaks about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre being under construction. So he's the first one that gives us the detailed information about the transition from pagan Jerusalem to Christian Jerusalem. And then all the others that I mentioned earlier. But Christianity was victorious, at least for a while, but not for too long. A little bit of church history, if I may. 361, Constantine the Great dies, 337, replaced by his son, another Constantine, and he dies at 361, and the empire has a new emperor now, and his name is Julian, or Julianus. In Christian history, he's called the apostate. Julian was educated as a Christian in the court of the emperor. He was very much fond of the old Greek world, and he was in the opinion that Christianity is not a good religion for the Roman nature or for the Roman Empire. He wanted to reverse everything and reintroduce paganism. One argument he was making was the following. As pagans, Rome was victorious. As Christians, Rome is much weaker, and it's facing one defeat after the other. That was part of the argument. Historically, he was right. For that reason, we should go back to the pagan way of life, because Christianity doesn't serve well the Roman character or the Roman Empire. The fact that he was quite successful shows us that it took a long time for the Romans to embrace Christianity. Because once he made that decision, it looks like everybody in the Roman Empire is more than happy to go back to the pagan way of life. Revolution was not completed yet. It will take some time. So how can you basically advocate paganism in one main way? Jesus said that the temple will be destroyed. I'm going to give the Jews permission to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And once the temple will be rebuilt, that will be the proof that Jesus was wrong. It will help me to bring everybody back to the pagan world. That was the plan. So 361, he's taking power, and he's authorizing the Sanhedrin that was based in Tiberias in Galilee, and he sends a letter to the leaders, the Jewish leaders, and you understand how thrilled they were. He said, you have my permission to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild your temple. It started the whole frenzy around the Jewish world. You don't understand that. All around the world, Jews were praying for Jerusalem. Until this very day, we say next year in Jerusalem, hoping that the regathering will take place. And now the emperor himself is advocating the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. You don't understand the excitement. And as far as we know from the books and from the sources, Jews did come back to town and started rebuilding the temple. Stopping here to point at a stone over there. This stone is in the western wall, the western retaining wall of Jerusalem today. It's about 40 feet above the ancient road, but the road that we see today is from Jerusalem of the 1st century. After the city was destroyed and rebuilt by the Romans, the new road was covering the old one, and this one is right by the level of the road from the 4th century, and that's kind of a graffiti. A happy Jewish pilgrim came to the Western Wall, engraved his graffiti, which is a quote from Isaiah 66. When you see this, the prophet says, your dry bones will flourish like green grass. Basically, we are back. We are back and flourish. We're going to rebuild the temple. You do understand the excitement. You understand the concern among the Christian leaders. The emperor now is going to turn his back totally to the Christian world to embrace paganism. As we know from the books, and we do have enough information, Julian, that led his army against Persia, was killed in battle, and that whole revolution came to an end. And after Julian was killed, That was the necessary step for the ultimate victory of Christianity. Julian was an obstacle, but only for 2 years. Rumor has it he was murdered by his Christian servant, although it was never confirmed in the Roman books, because they did not like this counter-revolution of Julianus. But to find in Jerusalem a stone of a Jewish happy pilgrim engraving his happiness about coming back, it's quite interesting when you find that in the city engraved on the Western Wall. So Christianity is going to complete its victory, and Jerusalem once again, Temple Mount, they started cleaning Temple Mount to rebuild the temple, is back to its previous condition. It will be the dump of the city until the Muslims will reconquer Jerusalem and proclaim the Temple Mount as a holy place to Islam. We'll speak about it in a few minutes. By the way, Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, not even once. Jerusalem and Islam are not connected in any way. The city is not mentioned in the Quran. We'll speak about the reasons how it became to be a holy place for the Muslims, but it's not mentioned in the Quran. Well, the other person that was very influential in Jerusalem was the Empress Eudokia. She was the wife of Emperor Theodosius. She divorced him, and she brought with her a lot of money to the city, and she built the walls of the city. She built a big church right above the pool of Siloam that I mentioned to you yesterday, the one that we purchased from the Greek Orthodox and started cleaning that. She was the woman behind the project. So coming to Jerusalem and live in town for more than 20 years, that added to the city also the political gravity. She divorced him officially, but still she had many supporters, so she established herself in the city that was second only to Constantinople, basically. So Jerusalem is getting more influential and more prosperous as well. And the climax came in the days of an emperor by the name of Justinian. Justinian was the emperor, and he did a good job in constructing in Jerusalem the man that built the Hagia Sophia church in Constantinople, which is Istanbul of today. It's a massive building, very beautiful one. It's a mosque today. When he completed the project, he said, "King Solomon, I defeated you." His idea was to build a building nicer than Solomon's temple. That was the bar that he tried to defeat, and that was engraved inside the church when he built it and dedicated it. And he said, "King Solomon, I defeated you by building this church still standing today." So Justinian was deeply engaged in what happened in Jerusalem as well. He had a biographer called Procopius from Beit Shan, Scythopolis, and we have the whole biography in details, especially his work in Jerusalem. So Justinian was the man behind another massive building that was called the New Church or the Nea Church. That's how it used to look like. We found a plaque of dedication. It's in the Jewish quarter today, but not much from the church was found. The reason is when the Muslims will conquer Jerusalem to build their palaces, they dismantled completely this church and simply reused the stones. So from the church of Justinian, that was the biggest building in the city. All right? Nothing was left except for the plaque of dedication, which was in the basement of the building. So the stones are still there, although they were used in a different way. I do want to show you how the Pool of Bethesda looks like in just a minute. We do know the Pool of Bethesda to be the location beyond any doubt, because water sources were used constantly for a long time, well documented, and that takes us back to the Byzantine era. That's the church of St. Anne's that stands above the ancient pool. So if you clear all the stones and the columns and you fill everything with water, that will be the Pool of Bethesda. That's where Jesus healed the man who was sick for 38 years. And this will be the ruins of the church that were built in the days of Constantine, all right? Just to cover the ancient pool and to erect a big building. That will be one of the churches we know beyond any doubt still there from the Byzantine era of Jerusalem. But we had another clue, so to speak, another clue that we are using even today, and that will be a map that was found on the eastern side of the Jordan River in a town called Madaba. The map of Madaba is not only fascinating, it gives us a lot of information about how the Christian holy sites in Israel used to look like. This is the mosaic floor, the town of Madaba, and quite in a bad condition, as you can tell, but Jerusalem was almost found intact without any damage. 2.5 million stones, all right? It's quite a big one. And you do see Jerusalem over there as well. And this gives us a description of Jerusalem from the second half of the 5th century. 6th century. How do we know that? Well, because of one main reason. The church I just mentioned to you, okay, the Nia church that was standing right over here, was dedicated by Justinian the year 543. This mosaic floor that was in the church was conquered by the Persians 614 and destroyed. So this map has to be sometime between 543, the dedication of the church, and 614, the destruction of the building. That was a missing link. This map gave us very clarity about Christian Jerusalem from the second half of the 6th century, and here's what was found. Number one, Damascus Gate on the northern side of the city. You see the corridor, which was the main street of Jerusalem, going through the places like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and goes to the house of Caiaphas. The Ner church was built here. Temple Mount, all of it, will cover about 20% of the city size. It's not even there. Why not? Because Jesus said it will be destroyed. We don't even mention that on the map of Jerusalem because it's not there. Well, it's very much there. And it covers quite a large area. Interesting, the Eastern Gate was important. So you have the Eastern Gate that leads nowhere. All that was part of Temple Mount. It's just not on the map. How interesting. So we do have the key locations in the city. The main road, you see the columns of the corridor right here. So once you find the map, an opportunity presented itself in 1967 after we liberated Jerusalem, take it from the Jordanians, it was a chance to excavate. And guess what you do? You take the map of Medaba found in 1884, and since you know the location still there, you mark a line between the Damascus Gate and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you start looking for the columns, and guess what? Bingo, they're there. So in 1971-72, when the Jewish quarter was excavated, they were using this map in order to find Jerusalem from the second half of the 6th century, and that's part of what was found. I'm standing on the stones that made the main street of Jerusalem back in the Byzantine era. It was called the corridor. Corridor means the heart, and that was indeed the main marketplace and the road that crossed the city from north to south. It was much wider, divided by two rows of columns to three spaces. The columns behind me, therefore, about 1,500 years old, and going back to Christian Jerusalem, a city that was built replacing the Roman town that was called Aelia Capitolina. In 1884, in a place in the eastern part of the Jordan Valley, the town of Medaba, they found in the ruins of a church a large mosaic floor that depicted Christian holy sites in Palestine from the 6th century, the days of Justinian basically. And in that mosaic map, they found all the key locations of Christian Jerusalem, including the road that connected all of them. So the road started at Damascus Gate up north, went through the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the main marketplace, and down to the Nia church built by Justinian at 543 AD. And therefore that was the clue the archaeologists needed. So when Jerusalem was excavated after the Six-Day War, they knew exactly where to look for the columns of the corridor from the 6th century, and sure enough, they found it. If you go deeper into the old marketplaces, sometimes you go to the back of a shop, and you still see the columns of this corridor standing there in the city. But meanwhile, Jerusalem enjoys all the prosperity. The war never stopped for a minute between the two main superpowers. It was Byzantium, or Christian Rome on one side, and the Persian Empire on the other side. Well, when you went to school and they taught you history, nobody taught you about the Persian Empire. It's just not part of our curriculum, not part of our civilization. They teach us about the Roman Empire. Let me tell you a few things about Persia. Under different dynasties, as big as Rome, as powerful as Rome, sometimes defeating the Roman army, we speak about the clash of the titans, if you wish, of two powers which are colliding for centuries. It so much exhausted the two of them that when a fresh power came from the Arabian Peninsula, the Muslims, it was easy for them to conquer the world literally because the two empires were simply exhausted. And you do see that Judea, or Palestine now, is very close now to the borders. And therefore, much attention was given to Palestine because the Jewish population was not loyal to Byzantium. And the Persians always looking to invade into Rome's territory or Byzantine territory by using the Jewish support. So the war never started for a moment. In the days of an emperor called Heraclius, who was the Byzantine emperor, he lost the city and the country to the Persian invasion. It was King Khosrow II that led a very successful invasion and occupied most of Palestine from the Byzantines, including a massive destruction of churches. Most of the churches were totally leveled, not by the Muslims later on, but by the Persians. The Emperor Heraclius went on a counterattack and was able to liberate the whole country from the Persians, including the true cross that was seized by the Persians and was retaken by the Byzantines, and they brought it back to Jerusalem, and that became to be a holiday that was celebrated for a long time, the 21st of March, 629, hallelujah. The city is back in Christian hands for a very short time. Because meanwhile, the Muslim tribes in the Arabian Peninsula are watching carefully that dynamic. They do understand that the two empires are simply destroying each other, waiting for the opportunity to take full control of the area after they seize this opportunity, and that will lead us now to the Muslim era. So we are leaving now the Byzantine era. Jerusalem is Christian for 300 years, a little more than that. It enjoyed a lot of prosperity. The city came to its climax. And now the Muslims are coming. That's going to change basically everything in the city's life. So another selected chapter, so to speak. We speak about chapter number 5 in our long journey to know Jerusalem. And we speak about Jerusalem under Islam. And let me show you where are we at historically. We speak about the green era. By the way, green is the color of Islam. It's called Saladin green. Every Muslim country in its flag has to have some green. All of them, all right? Morocco is an exception. It's red basically, but they do have a star inside, which is green. That will be the way to identify Islam. If you drive through Muslim areas, like in my country, you see the green neon lights on the mosques. It's not a coincidence, all right? The main color of Islam will be green, and some of you may remember the, how do you call it, the green thing that you put around like a bandana that Hamas is wearing. All right, it's not a coincidence why you wear green. That's the color of Islam. So now we speak about a new era in the city's history. The Muslim tribes are coming from the Arabian desert, and that's going to change everything. Historians even today are puzzled by the question, how did they do that? Because in the process of conquering the world literally in 50 years, the Muslim territories are expanding from the Atlantic Ocean, Morocco, all the way to India. Nobody grew that fast except for Alexander the Great, maybe Genghis Khan later on. And historians are do not understand, how did it happen so quickly? They do know that Rome and the Persians were totally exhausted. But it still does not explain the rapid conquest and the easy that it went. One possibility has to be that the only time that people went to conquer the world because they were commanded to do that in their religion, that's Islam. It's not an option. Islam, and I'm not being anti-Muslim, all right? Islam is in a stage of war constantly. Islam does not have to proclaim war on anybody. It is in a stage of war against non-Muslims. Jesus did not order his disciples, you go and conquer the world for me by killing all the others. You won't find it in the Bible for the Jews as well. The first religion that made religion a reason to go and conquer and destroy is indeed Islam. I'm not being biased against Islam. That's what the Quran teaches. The ultimate way to serve Allah is to go to conquer the world for Him and for Muhammad. And that's a strong incentive. It's a strong motivation. It's not even an option, it's a must. So if you take the religious zeal plus the poor condition of the Byzantines and the Persians, it begins to make sense. How was it possible for people that were not well organized, mostly illiterate, that did not have a written civilization, they came from the desert, and in a very short time were able to defeat the mighty powers of the era? That has to be that combination of the weakness of the superpowers back at the time, plus the zeal of Islam. They are commanded in the Quran to conquer the world for Allah and Muhammad. It's not an option. That's jihad, basically. Jihad is not one of the 5 main pillars, but it's very close to that. So that would give them a big advantage. Plus, in the case of Palestine, they were assisted by the local Jewish population. True, most of the country was Christians. Jerusalem was exclusively Christian, but many Jews still lived there. And Christianity was taken as an enemy, and the Muslims, it looks like they're going to be much easier to deal with, and the Muslims were using the help of the local Jewish population to take the country. That was in vain, by the way. They were not much easier with the Jews than the Christians were. But Christianity and Judaism is so much of tension over there that the hope was, from the Jewish perspective, that the Muslims are going to ease the pressure. They made a promise that Jerusalem will be open for the Jews. That's enough. To get the Jewish help is to promise that Jerusalem will be accessible once again. The campaign started at 636 as the Muslim hordes are crossing the Jordan Valley into Christian territory, and they conquer the area piece by piece. Couple of decisive battles. In the 20th of August, 638, the battle of 636, the Battle of Yarmouk takes place, and this is the final battle where the Byzantines are losing the country, and for 400 years, Israel will be in Muslim hands until the Crusaders will come to reconquer it for Christianity. So when the conquest was over, only then the Muslim army turned to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was isolated from all around. The Christian army had to withdraw from the area, and Jerusalem will be the next place to be conquered. Keep in mind, it was not a holy place for the Muslims. They knew about Jerusalem. You need to know that Muhammad, when he started his mission, he went to the Jews first, and not to the pagans of the Arabian Peninsula. He went to the Jews and tried to convince them that he has the updated version of God's will. It was a big deception what the Jews believed until then, and he was asking them to follow him. And of course, they threw him from the stairs, as you understand. But if you appeal to the Jews, you know something about the Jewish way of life. You heard about Jerusalem, obviously. So Jerusalem is not a place for the Muslims yet officially, but it was always in the background. There will be some connection between the two religions, but not to begin with. And only after he was disappointed from the Jews, he decided to turn against them. But that would be the ambition. To convert, not to convert even, to convince the Jews that the blessing did not go through Isaac. That was a deception of the Jewish sages. The blessing goes through Ishmael, which means Islam should be the dominant religion and not Judaism, including what happens in the area of Palestine. So now Jerusalem will be conquered by the Muslims, and it's a very interesting story. Number one, for the first time in almost 1,000 years, it's a totally new civilization. From the days of Alexander the Great until the conquest by the Muslims, it's basically the same language, the same lifestyle, the same almost everything, although it's a new religion. We speak about the Greco-Roman civilization. And suddenly something totally new comes. People come from the desert. They do not understand city life. They did not want to live in a city. For the Muslim mindset, you serve your God as a warrior and not as a farmer and not as a civil servant. That's what you're commanded to do. These people are not accustomed to live an urban way of life. So they came as conquerors and brought with them something that the locals, of course, did not understand. But we have to say that Islam was much inferior back then when it comes to culture than the Christian world was. Later on, the Muslims are going to learn. They're going to develop a lot of science and a lot of fields, and they will be leading the world for a while. But they started as people coming from the desert, impressed by the culture they've conquered, embracing parts of it. It's interesting how it works. You need to understand that during the revolution of Christianity, all the books and all the knowledge of the Greco-Roman pagan world were officially rejected by the Christian church. Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, these were considered to be heresy. I mean, the Christian world was rejecting the whole Greco-Roman civilization. It would have been lost forever, except for the Muslims. They came out from the desert without any culture whatsoever. It was the whole world over there, rejected by the Christian church, to be embraced by the Muslims. We would not know today about Plato and about Aristotle, interesting, if it wasn't for the Muslims that simply embraced a world that was rejected by the church. to embrace it to their religion, and to develop some kind of Muslim philosophy based on the Greek and the Roman philosophers, and to develop a whole culture that was enriched by something that the Christian world had totally rejected. Interesting how it works, huh? So they came as people out of the desert without any knowledge and simply embraced everything that the Christian world rejected to become the masters of the whole region. But Jerusalem is going to experience for the first time something totally new, totally different, something which is not Roman in any style. And through the whole days of the Muslim conquest of the land, they only made a small minority of the local population. Jerusalem was quite Christian as it was before the conquest, but now the masters were basically Muslims, and all the others will be called dhimmi. Dhimmi is a term in Islam, second-class citizens that had to accept the sovereignty of Islam and pay taxes to the Muslims. So Jerusalem is still Christian. Churches were not destroyed that much by the Muslims, were destroyed by the Persians about 20 years earlier. The Muslims are quite tolerant. They let the people live their lives. They even allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem. So that starts a whole new chapter in the city's history. And I do want to share just a little more with you, and give me 10 more minutes, all right? And we'll bring that to conclusion. So these changes are going to be quite evident. And the question is, how Islam is connected to Jerusalem, or what will be the connection there? Well, it took some time for the Muslim to understand that it's not enough to be warriors, somebody has to run the empire. You need to have the tax collectors, and you need to have all the civil servants. Who would that be when all of the Muslim tribes are basically illiterate? You leave intact all the previous system, all the Christians that were the state officials maintained their position. They were running the empire for the Muslims, at least for a while. You see, you don't want to convert everybody to Islam. You want to dominate them, not to convert them. Because as a principle, Muslims do not pay taxes for the kingdom. Somebody has to pay taxes. Who would that be? All the non-Muslims. So the idea was we are going to conquer the world for Allah. It doesn't mean we are going to convert them to Islam. We don't want to bring them up to our level. We are superior, they are inferior. They're going to pay taxes. And therefore, it was not destroying the Christians or the Jews. It was simply subjugating them, making them second-class citizens that enjoy almost no rights, acknowledging the sovereignty of Islam. But from Jerusalem's perspective, basically, yes, the masters were Muslims, but daily life kept going as it was always, including pilgrims that came to visit. You see, for the Muslims, that was a source of money, because pilgrims that came to Jerusalem brought money with them. It was part of the economy. So the city did not change its nature, at least not for the first 50 years. It stayed as Christian as it was, although the new masters were of a new religion and a new lifestyle. Since I do want to send you home on time, let me just, how do you say, cut to the chase, am I right? Okay, sometimes I'm proud of my Americanisms. Well, here's the tradition about how the city was conquered, and we'll divide it to traditions and to some history. The story goes that the second caliph, a man by the name of Omar, was leading the Muslim army against Jerusalem. The city was governed by the local archbishop, a man called Sophronius, and they start negotiating over the surrendering of the city. And Omar says, if you open the gates of Jerusalem and you surrender, I promise you that churches will not be destroyed, and if anybody wants to leave town, surrender the weapons, you can leave the city. And then the gates are open, and the Christian gentleman is asking Omar to come with him. And Omar says, I had a vision last night. I want to pray where Solomon's temple used to be. And the Christian leader takes him to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, obviously. And Omar says, no, that's not the one. You try to lie to me. I want to go to the place where Solomon's temple used to be. Again, this is the Muslim stories. Omar had an advisor that was a converted Jew, a man by the name of Hyber. He says, well, come with me. I know exactly where Solomon's temple used to be. And he takes him to Temple Mount. As far as we know, the first time there was some connection is that gentleman showing Omar that that's where Solomon's temple used to be. Omar is ordering to clean the area, inviting Jews into the city, builds a small mosque over there, and says, you Jews are going to be responsible for cleaning the area, maintaining the place. I respect Solomon's temple, and that will be your place, and I will exempt you from taxes. You're doing such an important job, right, protecting the place for me. That's the Muslim story that was developed later on. All these are legends and folklore and tradition. As far as we know, Omar never visited Jerusalem. The city simply surrendered, the city was conquered, and a new era is about to begin. We do know that Omar is writing a Bill of Rights for the local community, and it does look quite tolerant. It doesn't speak about oppression. It doesn't speak about confiscating property. It looks like if you accept our authority and our sovereignty, you can live. You will be dhimmi. That will be the title until this very day. If you live in a Muslim country and you're not a Muslim, you're a dhimmi. All right? That means a second-class citizen that doesn't enjoy any rights. Not back then, the 21st century. Keep that in mind. All right? In Muslim countries today. So that will be the division of the world, the Muslims and under-Muslims, or those dhimmis. So that's how it started. Again, if you want to take some traditions and blend them in with the rest of it, but I do want to bring it to conclusion, so please bear with me for a few minutes as I'm running all that through. And I do want to speak about the connection of Temple Mount and Jerusalem to Islam, a short video with your permission, and then we'll bring that to conclusion.
On top of Temple Mount, for the last 1,300 years or so, two main buildings are standing. The third holiest place to Islam, although Jerusalem is not mentioned even once, is located on top of Mount Moriah. That's where once upon a time the Jewish temple was standing. The Dome of the Rock, built 692 AD by Abd al-Malik, who was the caliph at the time. In 705, Marwan II had built the Mosque of Al-Aqsa. These are the two main structures standing on top of Temple Mount.
Question has to be, what's the connection of Jerusalem with Islam? As I mentioned, and I'll do that repeatedly, it's not mentioned in the Quran. And the question is, what's the connection? Well, if you go to chapter 17 in the Quran, it teaches the following. It speaks about a night journey of Muhammad from Mecca to the most remote area in the world. That's what the Quran says. The traditions will add later on the hadith, as they call it, that Muhammad had ascended from that location only for one night. And up there they had a session attended by Allah, by all the angels and the prophets, Jesus included. Jesus is believed to be a prophet in Islam. It's called Nabi Isa. And after a long session, everybody agreed that Muhammad has the most updated version of God's word, and all humanity should follow Muhammad's lead. And he came back to earth. The Quran speaks about the most remote area. That could be Spokane. We do not know the location. So the connection is that the ascension of Muhammad took place in Jerusalem, although Jerusalem is not mentioned even once. And the question is, why make that connection? Well, because if you are a genuine Muslim leader and you want to rule Muslim territory, you should do that from Mecca. Well, as the empire was growing, Mecca is simply not in the center. Mecca doesn't have any main road that leads to it. You want to rule more effectively, you need to go to a central location. They chose Damascus. If you choose Damascus to rule from, you'll be accused by the clerics. You're not a genuine Muslim, because a genuine Muslim should rule from Mecca. So out of a necessity, you had to relocate and go to Damascus. And you try to find a place around Damascus that you can connect somehow with the Muslim scriptures. Jerusalem was there. It's only about 100 miles away from Damascus. It's not Mecca. Everybody heard about Jerusalem or the temple. That's what the origins of Islam is, the Jewish religion. So why not make the connection? Jerusalem, Temple Mount, was a place that the Christians were not interested in. It was a dump. The Jews are not even nearby. Let's proclaim Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the place of the ascension of Muhammad, just to stop the clerics and to stop the riots, because all around the Muslim territories, people were rioting against the leaders. You must rule from Mecca, otherwise you're not a loyal Muslim. That's the story. Out of a necessity to try to calm down the opposition of the clerics, Islam embraced Jerusalem to be the place of the ascension of Muhammad. And that adds now Jerusalem to the list of a holy place to the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. A very flattering situation for the city, but a very dangerous one as well. I'm going to bring that to conclusion for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll speak about the Crusaders very briefly. We'll speak about the Ottoman Empire, and then we'll speak about Jerusalem as capital of the state of Israel. A divided city for 19 years, a reunited city, and a city that will never be divided again. And everybody says, amen. Well, at least that will be the proclamation that you hear around Israel. We'll speak about the controversy around the city. You need to know, until 2018, when President Trump officially recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel, no American president did that. Most countries around the world do not agree that Jerusalem should be capital. And if you wonder why, please wait until tomorrow. We'll try to clarify that as well. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your attention. Have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow, either tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening. Thank you.